Hey guys, howdy, I hope you are fine. As you seen in the thumbnail, in this video, we are gonna see, what if Naruto was trained and raised by Minato? Part 1. I request you to check the author of this fanfic, and show some love and support. Name of the story is do check it out. All details in description. And if you want next part of this series, please leave a like and comment 5 blue emoji. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Naruto x Daenerys Targaryenal uncensored spicy version, link in description. There was nothing except for the pitter-patter of the late evening shower. Everywhere, and all around, there were signs of things that were coming the following morning. Some men and women were outside, fixing up the series of ladders that were meant to be used to fix wooden roofs into a manageable state. Other people were happily sitting underneath an oaken porch, admiring the dying sun's rays kiss the world around them. Such a sight was unusual, but not rare. Sometimes, a storm would end with the red and golden sun leaving its lasting impression. However, most of the youngsters who lived in the town were too busy to lay back and watch the sunset with awe and wonder. On a far end of the Konoha village resided the not-too-progressive side. This was the area where those with a desire to achieve more never went farther than their front door. However, even these people had hope. They were a family at the very least. Yet, this air was never the same for a small child. Certainly, in the terms of this certain person's mind, he was not a child, but a full-fledged ninja. He was going to be the next biggest thing since ramen itself. Yet, today was not a day to shout his proclamation to whoever wanted to hear. Today, the said child was sitting on the top of monuments that bared the faces of 5, most now long since past, rulers. The brown, worn mountainside was often the area where this child went to think by himself. Sometimes, it was about what his purpose in life was. Other times, it was to snicker at the latest victims of his practical jokes. At this hour, however, was more of the first option. A soft wind picked up, with the drizzle still hitting the golden hair, dripping down towards the pale flesh of the small figure. To the wind itself, this child's posture was not something it normally was. In fact, there was water there on the face that had nothing to do with the falling rain. Those bright, blue eyes that were normally filled with care and determination were closed at the moment. Thoughts were screaming past the figure, more thoughts than normal. On top of that, one of his friends had disdained him for a failure that was his entire fault. He was not ready, and that enough was to cause him his own sense of mental grief. Clenching his hand together, he rammed it against his face to hurriedly dry away any tears that were still there. Sasuke. Sakura. Even Kakashi. I'm sorry I failed. Yet, even while he was trying to make himself seem better off physically, there was still that small sense of worry in the inside. He decided not to hang around his friends or peers for a while as he had his own thoughts to think of. Even if I did fail, I must make sure that I won't fail again. My friends are like family, and I can't bear to think of. His thoughts trailed away at that moment as a figure managed to land right next to him with a small sigh. Naruto. I know you are upset, but come on. Even you can't be this sad for so long, right? Where is your fire, and your dreams? It's been a few weeks already, and the blonde-haired child, no, it was better to say, teenager, if anything, turned around to face the other blonde woman in front of him. Her face was set in a tone of worry, but her eyes were trying to bore some of this teenager's old fire back within him. But Ba-chan, Naruto, as well as everyone else you hold dear, am worried greatly about you. You haven't been accepting any missions, you've been lying around your apartment until just recently, and even I don't see you running around my room. Do you have any idea? The woman paused for a moment before giving the boy called Naruto a smile, that without you there to bug me, I have managed to complete more paperwork? It was a start, but the woman had managed to get the unknown spirit of Konoha burning once again. A couple of days have passed since that day, and a certain teenager was walking just outside the edges of the village. He wasn't going too far away, for the enemies from afar were always bound to be near. The biggest threat, of course, was the ones who wore black cloaks with wispy, red clouds. Those clothing styles made it seem to be as if they were one with the demonic sky and wind itself. Red out of the amount of death they have brought upon. I wonder what Ba-chan is doing. He wondered with a slight yawn. Scratching his head, he blinked a few times before deciding to head back towards the village. After all, Night was beginning to fall once more and he wanted to be indoors and feel nice and safe and warm and toasty. Not to mention, think, much more determined, about how to rescue his friend from that thing. After placing some chakra into his feet, he decided to go on ahead and run off towards his dorm. Before crashing right into a figure. "OWWW. He cried out, rubbing his head back and forth, fast, as if trying to calm himself down from a pain that won't go away with a simple rub. "It's the Kyuubi," came a cry out from the background. "Grab him." Two strong arms picked up the body of Naruto as he tried to go on off and lunge them off of him. To think it was easier than we thought it was. "Shut it. Grab him." Something hit him at the back of the head. The last thing that he could register in his brain was black cloaks with the tinge of some color, but blackness had already claimed him. Groaned a small mutter from the teenager with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, admiring the time to take in the view all around. Slowly, the scenery was sharpening, and the dull pounding in his head slowed down just the slightest. There was still the horrible pain on the back of his head, but it seemed to be that everything was going back to normal. Well, as normal as it can get with his body apparently lying down in a room of white that screamed out, "Hospital." "Hey, he's awake," came the sound of someone highly amused. With a slight moan, the teenager called Naruto turned around to face the figure that was in front of him. The man had long hair, as well as a smile that was plastered all over his face. He was rather young looking, but with a simple nod of his head, he turned around to face someone who was currently out of Naruto's line of sight. "What's going on here?" With a slight movement, he allowed his body to raise just a bit higher off the bedding, the white sheets being removed away at the slightest. That was when he realized that he was bandaged up his arms, but they were doing rather well. "Okay. What the hell is going on here?" That was when his eyes widened up to the size of small saucers. Right in front of him was a man that had bright, hopeful eyes as his own. Pulling his gaze out, he noticed the blonde hair had the same mop-like appearance as Naruto's own. A dark green vest was wrapped around his upper torso area with a dark shirt underneath. However, it was not those details that caught him off guard. It was the fact that the man was the Yondaime. "What the hell? Arg. This can't be happening, little guy. You alright? You make it seem as if you have seen a ghost, eh?" With a happy grin, the man, the Yondaime, placed his body next to the chair that resided near the window. "Ah, you must be confused as to where you are. You know, I have never seen your face as a genin before." With a little shake and another carefree smile squiggled down upon his face. "You are a very lucky person, you know. We found you right outside inside the outer wall, slumped over and almost beaten up. Those markings on your face," he began with a little point towards Naruto's cheeks, "were pale, but freshened right up in about 7 days or so." "7 days?" cried out the blonde teen as stunned blue eyes met calm and caring ones. First, the Yondaime is here, talking to me, and now I have been out for 7 days. Holy Kami." He was still panting when the adult man only gave a small chuckle. "You know, if it wasn't for the fact we saw you injured, I wouldn't believe that you saved from near death." The voice of the Yondaime seemed to get serious near the end, but those eyes. Those blue, bright eyes seemed to have some sort of hidden sadness in them. Not a very keen sadness, but a more general one. Like one that was given to someone that you only slightly knew. "No duh, Naruto. He's the Yondaime. Where the hell am I?" It was not helping at all that the idiot of a furball was not talking to him, or responding to anything at all. It was odd, but then again, as was everything else that was going on in this current moment. The medic nins managed to get everything all nice and cleaned up, you know. The only injuries they couldn't seem to treat were these little markings here. The man said, pointing at the teen's face, "But, I guess it's nothing major to be worried about." A smile once more lit up the face. "I mean, you seem to have excellent healing capabilities." Naruto was taking this conversation in as something one-sided. The Yondaime was still there, talking as if this was something that was known as something normal, and that there was nothing wrong. "Well, nothing majorly wrong. Why, you are the why Yondai, me," the worked-up teenager managed to stutter out. It wasn't a question, it was a matter of fact. However, had only brought up a moment of silence before there was the hand of a certain Yondaime, covering his mouth. After a few crucial moments, There ensued the snickering of one person towards another. Finally, after 5 seconds or so, the man who Naruto had once looked up to, and still does, the man who sealed the demon within him, laughed. A lot. Me? A Yondaime, he chuckled, those blue eyes lightening up the room. Naruto, the blonde teenager still lying down on the hospital bed, had no idea that when he laughed like that, his eyes did the same thing. Listen, kid, I may be a Junin, but I am not a Hokage. Placing his hand down back towards his lap, he moved his face a bit closer to give the teenager a side, yet happy look. Besides, the Sandaime hasn't even left his post yet. You are thinking a little bit too ahead of yourself, you know, the man finished. He got up, stretching his legs and nodded. It's Minato. Minato Namikaze. Oi, Minato-sensei. Naruto could only blink at the oddness of everything. The door towards his room slowly creaked open when a different figure entered the room. Silver hair spiked up in odd means and a mask was hanging around where the lower face should have been. A small mental cry echoed in his head, but Naruto's subconsciousness suppressed it. It was alright processing other, important things and did not want to input new information in this crazed ordeal. It seems that the child has awakened up, the kid stated. The new words made him jolt more so. Now is the time to ask questions, I believe, or later if you desire. In the meantime, Minato-sensei, I will go train. With that, he was gone, leaving Naruto confused. He could swear he looked like Kakashi, albeit smaller, but his tone of voice hinted something like what old Sasuke was. I am holier than thou. Oh, what's going on? He screamed, clutching his hands towards his forehead. This action, however, led to the fact that Minato looked at him with an even more worry filling those eyes. WH. Why does he look like me? He cried out as well in his head. Hey, are you alright, little guy? With those words coming towards him, the blonde teenager only gave a false smile. Ah, a headache, he lied. He most definitely needed time to get his thoughts gathered together. He was panting and screaming in his head, and there was no fox there to help explain at this current moment. Well, that's good. I'll explain what happened when we found you, and you can explain back next time. Walking towards the door, he turned around and gave a nod. I hope you can get better soon. And I hope I can find your team sometime soon, little guy. With a little air of something Naruto couldn't sense, the adult man reached the door and opened it with his hand. On a second thought, he turned around right before he was going to leave. Hey, I forgot to ask something. What's your name? I can't keep on saying things like, little kid, all the time. Normally, Naruto would hate it if someone called him that. After all, he had some little bit of growth in the past few months. However, his thoughts were occupied elsewhere. Nah. Naruto. Naruto Uzuma. No. Don't use something like that. You have no idea where the hell you are. Or what's going on. Uzumame, he finished with an inward sigh. The Yondaime, no, Minato, stopped for a few moments, giving him a confused look, before giving a little nod to continue off towards the hallway. Once a couple of minutes passed in pure silence, Naruto did the next best thing one could do in a situation like this. Bang one's head against a pillow and scream your lungs out. A foot fell down on some grass as the figure continued to walk down an area that looked like something akin to a park. What this place was, though, was a training ground. After all, what better place to help your students? Today, however, was different. Today was the start of some new discussion that couldn't get finished in the past few days. So, Minato-sensei, began Kakashi with a little nod. What did you get out of him? I already asked around, and I have yet to hear of someone who is missing a member of a squad. But, with all that has been going on lately, I think he could be the sole survivor of one squad. Began a female who was sitting near the edge of a training log. The bark was slightly peeled away, showing that someone before had trained on this log many times. We already went through those scenarios. It would be unreasonable if the enemies came so close towards the Konoha gates without us noticing first. This came up from the once called Obito Uchiha. Minato gave a slight sigh. This whole troubling, yet slightly enlightening, experience was caused when they first ran into that poor figure of a child in the middle of training sessions. It was almost as if he appeared straight out of thin air. The teenager child looked as if he was hanging on a state of near death. There were some major gashes, but not a single minor one. However, the nurses had all claimed that by the third day or so, most of them have already healed up. His name is Naruto Uzumame, he responded. Uzumame. Now there was a name that was not to be expected. The last he heard, there was not any clan called Uzumame living in Konoha, nor were there that many clans that had blue-eyed and sun-kissed blonde hair. It's almost as if he's a mini-me. He muttered out, too soft for anyone else to hear. Anyways, I am going to go on out and check the rosters for anyone by that name. You three. Just make sure not to hurt each other much. He ended with a little sigh. However, with a smile once more on his face, he turned around and began to head towards the Hokage office. Most information about such things he needed could be found there. Uzumame. That sounds pretty unique. With a name like that, it should be rather easy to see where the child came from. Soft was the wind that blew through the large trees. Tall and majestic, they rose all around the perimeter of a large and powerful golden wall. Some of them were even inside the large expanse of architecture, giving forth shade that pleases whomever rests underneath. The gentle, southern wind caressed these large expanses of nature's might, making some of the bright, emerald leaves swayed from their respective branches before resting peacefully upon the ground. A movement of someone stirred some of the leaves on the dirt. After a few moments, one could see the hair of the bright sun heading off towards a certain red tower in the distance. A green vest, filled with all of the necessary equipment for anything a ninja needed, was easily noted as well. Dark blue, almost black, pants were on, as well as a lighter green undershirt that had golden ties around the elbow and wrist area. To the world, he was beginning to rise up in the ranks of one of the most legendary ninjas around. The main key words. Most of the surrounding areas have yet to learn of who he was, but to some of the citizens of this village in the leaves, he was almost like a yellow flash. Perhaps that was why people were becoming to associate him by this name. Yawning slightly, stretching his arms high in the air, the sun-kissed haired man blinked for a few moments before reaching a door with the kanji symbol of fire on it. Some men were already there, acting as guards from any possible attacks. They were also the ones to talk to if one was ever bored with life. "Hey guys," began the man. With a smile that seemed normal on his face, he took some steps inside the red-painted building. "I'm going to look through the genin materials really quick, to figure out the identity of Mr. Mysterious." This man had already told them the odd tale of the small child that his team had discovered outside the walls. The one on the left nodded, yawning a bit as well. "Minato, that yawn of yours is contagious." With a simple wave, the two guards stepped aside and allowed the man to enter. "The records are in the back, and the Hokage already allowed you some permission." Minato nodded as his hair on the side of his ear moved down with his head. "All right, thanks." Continuing down his path, he eventually made his way towards a dimly lit room filled with many scrolls. Plopping himself over towards one of the walls, he began to search for the proper years. Naruto Uzumame. He looks about 15 or so. That would mean that I have about 5 years of genin searching. Shouldn't be that hard. Arg. Came the cry from inside Minato's head as his hands went up towards his hair, trying to pull it away. He has been in this small, stuffy room for hours and had yet to discover anything about a child, teenager, person called Naruto Uzumame. Since he couldn't find the full name, he tried under the list of Uzumamian, coming only with nothing. There was some brief noted of an Uzumaki, from the land of the worlds, but that was far away and had nothing to do with the current situation. Then, he tried searching under Naruto, coming up with only the name of the topping used for a certain type of ramen. Slamming his head on the table, he moaned slightly. "This is harder than I thought." Lifting himself back up, he regained his calm composition. It wasn't every day that he acted like a child, but in certain moments like this, it was rather necessary to vent a little. Despite all of his planning and thinking, however, no face came up with something remotely similar towards the strange teenager. Except his face, but that was also irrelevant. How does a kid like this magically appear? There is no records of a missing team of either genin, kuinin, or junin, and no records of a missing blonde-haired child either. And since he was knocked unconsciousness, his appearance has nothing to do with a henge jutsu. There is the Konoha forehead protector upon his head, but with no dead or missing team members lately, he couldn't have just picked it up from a corpse. The mind of Minato Namikaze was going at a massive speed, thinking about who this child was and what was going on. After yet another few hours, the passing of the sun made him realize that it was already late in the evening. By the time that he left the Hokage Tower, the whole area was almost draped in darkness with the lights of the lamps showing the way. I wonder what I am going to have for dinner, he mused. His old sensei, and sometimes still his sensei, kept on muttering that he needed a certain someone to cook and take care of him, in general, settle him down. He wondered if Jiraiya meant something else behind those words. Naruto blinked at the ceiling, looking at the patterns created by the plaster that formed the base of support. Today, there was a little frog running around. It was very deformed for the fact that the little plaster pieces didn't make for the perfect figures of little froggies, but imagination was all that the forms needed. Still, it was a waste of the day. All of the doctors seemed to care for him more than normal, but he was still pondering over what was going on to really notice. Once the Yandai, Minato, left, things were rather boring around the hospital. He spent most of the day thinking about what had happened, and he still was. I wonder what happened. Let's see, I remember the black cloaks. His eyes widened up like saucers and he threw his body up from the bed into a sitting position. The thoughts of black cloaks could only mean one thing. He had been caught by the Akatsuki. He had to be, mainly for the fact that they were the only ones he knew that wore such black cloaks. He could faintly remember the faint blur of a color in the center, and that further concreted his ideas. Or at least, as concrete as he could get them right now. He defiantly wasn't in the cave where they did whatever they did to remove the demons from within their hosts. In fact, if he could swear on his forehead protector, he would on the vow that he was in the past. Which made him giggle slightly at that motion before getting more serious. Shuri, he was in the past. This could be a highly specialized genjutsu, probably made by Itachi. No, I didn't see anyone's eyes. Placing his hand on his chin, he began to ponder more, moving his normal smile into a thinking frown. I think I'll have to think about it later. First I have to assess what I do know. Well, apparently Minato is alive. Which means, dang. This place, wherever it is, whatever it is before I was born. That caused him to rub his head even more. This whole thought process was enough to make him crazy. On top of that, what was he supposed to call the blonde-haired man? Minato-san? Minato-sama? Minato Dono? Minato? That was when the door towards his own room swung open and the figure of who else? Minato waltzed in. His green Junin vest seemed to be a stark contrast against his bright hair, but the expression seemed filled with so many emotions that it was hard to place one with words. He smiled and waved, nodding a bit. Hey, Naruto. Just came by for a visit and to ask you some questions, if that is all right. Naruto blinked for a few moments before nodding a little bit. Sure, I guess. I mean, I got a couple of questions as well, he added with a little nod. He needed to know some things. Oh yeah, he really needed to know some certain things. Minato plopped his body down next towards the edge of the bed, looking at the whisker-marked face. So, let's begin. Where did you come from? Konoha, Naruto with a little nod, and, how old are you? 15 last time I checked, he added with a little smile. The adult nodded a bit, trying to settle the mood by a fraction as there still was that air of difference between the two blonde ninjas. 15, I guess that is a good number. I remember being 15. With another smile, he decided to continue with his conversation. Naruto didn't really mind a whole lot because it didn't seem like he was getting in trouble. And he was pretty sure that Yandai Minato wasn't from the interrogation section of Konoha's shinobi. Alright, Naruto, how about your clan name? That question made him think and ponder for a moment. He was still stuck in this whole, where am I, bit, but it reminded him that he had to be careful over what he said. Well, see, that's the trouble. I'm an orphan and I don't know my parents. I kinda gave myself the name, Uzumamiya, just to have a last name here. That was the truth. He was an orphan, and he did give himself the name Uzumamiya for this place. It just wasn't the entire truth. Some truth wasn't as bad as lying, at least. Oh, came the little mutter from Minato. His cerulean eyes seemed to get filmed with some sadness, as if he did something horrible with just asking that question. Noticing this, the teenager waved his hands back and forth, giving his own bright smile forth. Nay, hey, It's alright, Minato-san. He decided maybe, san, was the better word here. It's true that he will be. Who knows the Yondaime? That is, if he was in the past. And even if he wasn't and this was a genjutsu, he still would be the Yondaime. In the future, but that little tang of slight bitterness of this man sealing up the Kyuubi within him prevented, Sama. On the other hand, it sure did beat using the phrase, GG. Continuing his words, the teenager added, it's alright. It happened long ago, and I'm over with it. With a little hand, he pumped it in the air. After all, if I can't deal with that, how am I supposed to become the future Hokage? These words always made sense to him, and he sure did love yelling them out. He might have matured over the years, but that phrase will never tire him out. Or rather, something akin to that phrase. What surprised him a bit was that Minato smiled back, with a little nod. With your endless energy, I'm sure you can, kid. But, he added with a wink, you'll have to beat me to it, first. I plan to be the Hokage as well. Thus the night began with the laughter of two males who were closer to each other than they would think. The next day passed with relative nothingness. The nurses paced back and forth, and some of them even wanted to talk to Naruto himself. It was short conversations, nothing much, but at least it was something nice enough to take his mind away from the boredom. It was late afternoon, and he had already dropped the thought process of trying to figure out where he was. It was beginning to hurt too much. With a yawn and a sigh, he decided now was a great time to get his body up and out of this place. The hospital was no longer needed as he knew that all of his cuts and injuries were already healed up thanks to the fuzzball. Rubbing his tummy, he jumped up. His clothing were still the same, it seemed, and he knew they needed to be washed and whatnot. His nose could pick them up by just stench. Some stealth this would end up as. He mocked himself in his head before looking around for something to wear for the moment. In the closet were some black shorts with some white shirts hanging from the rack, all nice and recently pressed. Some of them seemed a tad bit too big on him, and the others seemed only slightly too small. With a sigh, he threw the ones that were somewhat in between the two sizes. It wasn't exactly such a perfect fit, but it was rather close. He only wished they had at least some orange in them. Slapping on his zori, he looked at himself in a mirror. Well, there goes the Akatsuki idea out of my head, he thought as he poked the 6 whisker marks on his face. He was pretty sure that even if those freaks would do a genjutsu on this level, saying if they managed to catch him in the eyes, it wouldn't be with him and his possession marks. Arg. Drop the subject, already. He scolded himself. Get out of the evil hospital first. Slowly opening the sliding, almost pale green door, he arched his blonde head out to face the hallway. He wanted to make sure there were no nurses there checking on him, otherwise. The coast was very much so clear. No one was there among the halls, but then again, the last time he remembered being in a hospital, there wasn't much once he was out of the critical status areas. His foot reflected off the laminated and recently polished tile flooring as he slowly walked forwards towards the back exit. There was a fence back there, but he was pretty sure that he could jump over it. Or walk over it, whichever seemed better. Finally reaching the back entrance, he placed his hand over the little latch and slid the glass panes open, very silently. Tiptoeing across the grass, he made sure to hide in the shadows as it still was daytime. Late afternoon still meant there were at least 4 more hours of sunlight, and he didn't want to get caught right there in the hospital yard. What type of ninja would he be then? The walls of the hospital were right in front of him, and with a little smirk, he threw himself over the top and landed safely on the other side. On one hand, he had a bag filled with the items be brought with him to begin with, and around his neck was his necklace that Ba-chan gave him. Yup. That was everything. Now, it was time to get a late lunch and scout the area. The layout certainly looked a bit like Konoha, but Naruto knew that his Konoha was different. With each little step, he searched each little nook and cranny. By the time night fell, he knew where everything was, more or less. The hot springs were still where they were, there was still the stadium where the Chunin exams would be held. Hell, even his apartment was still in the same spot. However, the blonde had to agree that it looked a bit better in this place, time. Man, I'm getting hungry. I wonder if Ichiraku is here, wherever this place is. Sure, I can accept the fact I am here, but that doesn't make it any better over how freaked out I am. The only good part about these past 2 days of waiting in the white, sterile room. Thinking time to figure out where he was. Sensei. Why is it that we always come here? You know that ramen is never good for you. It has way too much salt. With the amount of sodium intake you get, you can die within a year. Pale and as hideous as a corpse. A set of brightly paired blue eyes chuckled for a mere moment as two light brown chopsticks pointed towards a certain little trainee called Rin. Now. I happen to have a very good regimen for combating excess sodium, so I can allow myself to gorge a little here and there. To finish it off, the sixth bowl of ramen was placed right on top of the others. A silver-haired boy with a dark blue mask gave a blank stare towards the taller man. And what, may I ask, is this so-called regimen? A twinkle sparkled in Minato's eyes. Why, it's taking care of you three. The three teammates groaned for a little bit, but then stopped. It was their sensei's normal attitude, and they were used to it. After all, Minato was a calm, collected person. Quick to smile, he was the type of person who made anyone who saw him wish to be on the receiving end of it. It was then that another presence arrived next towards the group of four. Minato stopped slurping for a moment and turned his head. Within a matter of moments, his face signified happiness. Hello, Naruto. What brings you here? I heard that you had a little escape art from the hospital earlier, and the nurses were beginning to worry. His eyes opened once again, and his body language gestured the young teen to enter the booth seat next to the group. The adult man noticed that Naruto seemed pleased with that, and the white shirt, black-shorted teen plopped down on the seat. Oh, yes, here are my introductions. You already know that my name is Minato Namikaze, but here is my little Team 7 group. Team 7. Blinked the smaller teen as his blue eyes blinked back. Whoa. Minato thought there was something thinking along the kid's head, but a smile soon replaced the whiskered features. The blonde head turned to face the owner of the store, and Naruto barked out the order of miso ramen. Kakashi placed his hands on the wooden mock of a tabletop and took a glance at the raven, black-haired Obito. Dobi, pass some chopsticks. Dope. Cried out the Uchiha. Oh yeah, Kakashi Teme. Minato placed his hands between them both. With a small, collective sigh, he shook his head. Now, guys. It's not exactly the nicest things to say to each other. But on the corner of his eye, Minato noticed that Naruto seemed to have a face of déjà vu. Weird. The little leaves were slowly giving their weight towards gravity as they fluttered towards the ground in a waved grace. Like green snow, each an individual piece allowed themselves to fill the air, even if it was just for a fraction of a second. With a whisper, the wind soon vanished and the last of the fallen leaves kissed the tan ground. If this setting seemed similar towards a viewer, that was because they were only taking into account the general outlook over everything. If one were only to see closer into these little miracles of the day, one would see a cycle of life that dies, revives. Dies and revives. They would see that each insect, no matter how small, each animal, no matter how large, and each human, no matter how weak, is important towards the unset future. The future wasn't as stiff and as set as one would think or hope. It was lax and it could wane. Like a ripple in a pond. And as such a ripple, one could never tell how large and how wide one's actions could reach out towards. Everything was uniform. Everything had a purpose. Everything was in harmony. Was. X. Located off towards the side was a building that was fairly new. It wasn't large or wide, famous or expensive. It was just the average, little hole-in-the-wall restaurant that always held the best-tasting treasures. It was a place where one could go on ahead and sit with friends and talk about many subjects. Like life. It was a place where meetings could happen that dealt with the simpler things in life. Or, in this case, it could be a place where a stranger met with a sensei and his group over many bowls of hot, steamy ramen. Minato was no different from other people, despite the fact that people were slowly beginning to look at him with massive awe and respect. He always likes to believe he was the same as others. So, when life and fate decided to throw him his own stranger in the midst, he decided the best way to get some knowledge that was unattainable through the records was by mouth. Certainly, lies could be threaded there, as the blonde Junin was no idiot, but with some reassurance that he meant no harm towards the teenager could be the difference between a lie and bent truth. From then on, a bent truth could become trust. It was what Konoha needed most of all in these times. Trust for others, even if they were strangers. Besides, with Rin, Kakashi, and Obito here, there were at least 3 times the opportunities to make more friends. The Hokage seemed to trust the stranger called Naruto. and Sarutobi was not often wrong in his judgments of others. Though Minato did personally believe that his judgment over Orochimaru was something of ill error. So, hi. My name is Rin, happily exclaimed the small girl. Maybe small was a term the girl refused to use, but being only around 11 made her small in the eyes of Minato Namikaze. I'm decently good at genjutsu, and I want to be a medic nin, but a grade 1. Her finger was placed on her face before she tilted her head towards the side. Oh, she began, moving said finger from her face towards the figures of Obito and Kakashi. And I also prevent these two from trying to gorge each other's eyeballs out. The hidden snicker was detected by all. Hey! Cried out the raven-haired child. That's not true. I don't exactly want to do that towards a certain someone's eyes. But, like the blonde adult expected, the silver-haired prodigy scowled. Humph! Your eyes aren't even worth pulling out. You don't even have the shaw. Oi, 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 now everyone, Minato began as he placed a small, nervous smile. His eyes were shut as a little laugh came out of his mouth. I'm sure that pulling each other's eyes are never a good thing. With a little nod, he looked towards Rin, who was sticking her tongue out at both of the in-trouble children. And while you may not wish to partake in that, Rin, don't you think that teasing was a bit too much? Eyes, of all things? Naruto was being a little bit quiet, but his body language seemed to show that he seemed someone pleased with how the air was. Of course, Minato was still wondering as to why the boys seemed to have a certain response towards the name, Team 7, deciding to bring it up. He deduced now was a nice time to order another bowl of miso ramen for them both. Snapping his chopsticks in half along the dimpled edge, he slowly ate while turning his head to face the stranger. Like he thought, the blonde child was happily eating away at his ramen. Though, perhaps with a bit less table manners than most people would expect. Naruto. Began Minato as he dunked his little noodles a bit for them to receive more flavor. After chewing what his chopsticks would allow between the little pincer parts, he finished off his question, trying to be as discreet as possible. Have you heard of Team 7 before? The teen slurped at his own ramen for a few moments, placing the bowl down on the counter with a little clinking noise. Well, it's just that 7 was just a surprise, that's all. I had some friends from an old 7, that's all. Had some old friends? As in no longer friends, or a misplacement of a tense? No matter, I think one insightful question of visit will be a good start for this. The entity that was Naruto Uzumame was something to ponder about very much. Placing his bowl down, he nodded towards the owners of the Ichiruka ramen place to give him the receipt. Once all paid for and complete, he made sure to gather his team together and say goodbye to the blonde teenager. I hope to see you later, Naruto. Maybe we might run into each other once in a while here at this place, added Minato. Rin seemed eager in making a new friend, even though the blonde child was technically 15 years old, thus placing him 4 older than the girl, and things were looking prosperous. The whiskered-marked teen grabbed his hand and rubbed the back of his head, smiling all the way. Aha! We might. I just love Ichirakus, he added before leaving off towards the distance. Minato was halfway towards his own home, having already dismissed his team for the day, before thinking on what the child had stated. Ichiraku was rather a new building, being open for only a few weeks or so, and he could recall that the owner saying something that he was the only regular. Oh well, he muttered as she turned the key towards the front door. Sometimes he had to wonder as to why they had keys towards places if ninjas could just sneak their ways in through chakra. Dispelling that side thought, he opened the door and stepped inside, turning on the lights. Like always, his home was rather empty, leaving for nothing but silence. It was still rather early as the sun was still up, a few hours from setting, so now was a perfect time to train a bit. After checking his scrolls, he grabbed some more of the special tags that he has been working on. His earlier tags were nice, but they seemed to be too complicated and could get damaged rather easily. He needed to make one that could stick on paper, cloth, and kanais within the slightest touch and the least amount of effort. Having just finished a batch of them yesterday, it was time to test them out with his personal, and well-loved, jutsu. Closing the door once again, he walked at a steady pace towards his training area. Sure, he could have phased towards that area, but sometimes taking a stroll was nicer. Kuso. What am I supposed to do about sleeping? I don't own my apartment anymore, yelled Naruto in his mind as he kicked some pebbles in the street. Of course, He had to learn that he no longer owned an apartment right after the landlady pointed out that she had never seen him before, and that he better not show up there again unless he wanted to rent, as she had no need for hooligans like him. Honestly. Sighing, looking at the area around him, he debated whether or no to go towards an inn and just spend a night there before trying to find some way of making money. It was beginning to seem that he was going to get stuck in this place for a longer time period than he thought at first. Tugging out Gama-chan, his little purse, in the shape of a cute frog where he held all of his ryu, its bulging contents said he could afford a night in a nice inn for a little while, planning on what to do next. Wait. Now that he thought of it, he needed some new clothes, as his old ones were now on the hopeless cause moments of their fabric lives, and hospital clothing was nothing to run around in. Oh darn. Now I have to go shopping. Buying clothing was never a nice experience for him sometimes, and looking for the proper fit of style made him cringe. The sun was beginning to shine through the window. With a small breeze, the curtains began to sway to and fro, making the light dance upon the face of a sleeping form of a certain blonde teenager. In a subconscious moment, his body twitched away from the brightness and tried to face the area of shade in order to lengthen the time of sleep. Such movements, unfortunately, did not let Naruto sleep for much longer, as eventually his body made him get up and change into the few articles of clothing he bought. It was pretty much a copy of his old clothing. He had asked the old woman who owned the store to make an exact replica, after all. The only difference was the material of which the fabric was made out of, and to lengthen the pant legs a couple of inches. He was already growing a bit since he had bought his original, and this newer one covered up everything towards his ankles. Slapping on his zori to his feet once again, he stood up and faced the mirror. Rubbing the excess drool out of his face, he gave himself a thumbs up and a smile. His blonde hair was a mess, which it normally was, spiking up in all directions. His bright, blue eyes reflected a bit of the sunlight, leaving a little glare mark on the bottom edge. In his hand was his forehead protector. Even though it was probably smarter to not wear it, Naruto's mind had refused to do such a thing. He was a Konoha ninja after all. Even though he wasn't supposed to exist just yet, he wasn't going to let a little bit of oddness take off his protector. Iruka-sensei gave it to him, and darn it, he was going to keep it. With maybe the exception of his goggles, it was one of his prized items. Oh, and there was his necklace as well, which never left his, well, neck. It was still hanging there, the bright blue stone gleaming in the light. With a quick pull on the edges, Naruto smiled at his mirror image. Alright, here's to another day in trying to get back home by myself. And if that doesn't work, maybe I can find something to take me back. Also reflected was that smile, as well as the determination that was easily set in the face of someone who never gave up. Running out towards the front entrance of the lower-end inn, the sun-kissed blonde headed off towards his usual rounds of searching for, well, anything. As a second thought, perhaps it was best to understand what was going on around this current time. If the Yondaime wasn't exactly the Yondaime yet, then that would mean that he could still be in the times of the Great Shinobi Wars. He couldn't recall whether it was the first, second, or third one, making him think he should have paid a bit more attention in history for a few seconds. The main streets were exactly like the normal Konoha, as he had noted earlier in his brain. Some of the shortcuts that he knew since he was a child, playing all those pranks, were still there. However, there were also some few buildings on a certain side of the village that Naruto had never seen before. It wasn't much, but it was this small concentration of homes and trees by the pale yellow wall. Come to think of it, it's also where the large forest clearing is. Except there was no clearing there at this current moment, which only ensued the massive pangs of more headaches that suddenly began the pangs of stomach aches that demanded food. To Ichiraku's, Naruto screamed out a bit, smiling and turning the corners to face towards his favorite ramen shop. Wherever he was now, at least they had his ramen. Yet, as he was still having the delicious thoughts of food floating around his head, there was still that part that was still worried and confused still over where he was. It wasn't like it was an everyday occurrence that one was to go on off and land in an area where a dead hero still walked around. Wait, came the sudden thought as he turned his head to see the monuments where the faces of the Hokages were reliefed in the rocks. Gigi is still alive, too. His grandfather figure was still alive, but he had yet to see him. And if that meant that the old man was still kicking, then Orochimaru would be here in this area as well. And that would mean that there is no Sasuke here, either. He sadly thought, suddenly falling victim to the pang of guilt that always occurred when he dwelled on the second rescue mission that ended without success. With all of his thoughts, brooding, and whatnot, he didn't really notice he had rammed into a bickering onslaught of two children until he had quite literally rammed into them. With a little oomph, he glanced up to say sorry, only to realize that the two figures were some of the members from the current Team 7. Obito and Kakashi. Kakashi. "Hey, I think we broke Mamuto," came the cry from one of the boys, who had temporarily stopped exchanging insults to look at the teenager. Naruto was standing in the center of the road, looking at the silver-haired man with his eyes widening with each passing second. She. It was Naruto, dope, came the calmed response as the masked boy turned his head to face the teen. The two eyes blinked a bit, before turning back to face the raven-haired kid. "For once, idiot, you are right. I think we did break him." Kakashi. Naruto bellowed out, holding his finger at the boy who was smaller than him. Kakashi-sensei, with his blue eyes now the size of dish plates, his stance was now shaking as the two gave him weird looks. It was one thing to see a man whom the village praised back alive, but it was a totally different thing when your sensei is here as well, a man who you knew personally, in a midget size. For crying out loud, the silver-haired sensei was just a little bit halfway over Naruto's hip. "Obito, Kakashi," began a calm voice from behind the teenager. With a startled shock, Naruto launched himself at least a good 5 feet away from the man, who was none other than Minato. The adult had a little bit of wonder in his eyes as he glanced towards Naruto, but then turned back towards the two kids. "What did you do to the kid? Or more importantly, what did you do to yourselves? I heard your arguments halfway across Konoha." Obito pouted a bit, or something akin to a pout, and shoved his head towards the position of the silver-headed boy. Kakashi started it. Minato sighed. High above hanged the royal celestial heavens. It was the land where the legendary kamis lived, the supreme and ultimate beings. Only the demons and all of their powers could rival them, and even with that, perhaps only the sole Kyuubi no Kitsune itself. Its 9 tails were enough to frighten children into doing their chores. Some may doubt their existence, but for the most, there is agreement. However, they are only rumors, as the appearance of such large and mythical beasts have yet to be seen. Even these rumors had a mysterious origin, perhaps coming from the land that came from beyond the 5 shinobi grand countries. It was night yet again in the certain village that was simply called Konoha by the locals. On a little path, there were 4 shadows making almost no noise as they crossed from alley to alley. Soft noises could be heard from the footsteps of 2 of the figures, but it was apparent to some that such footsteps could be hidden away at a single thought. In the center of them all was a shadow that was taller than the others. They moved as a group, finally reaching the brightly lit center of a lower-class inn. Though not for the rich or famous, this little mother and father place seemed well kept. The paper on the doorframes made a nice color when the lights behind them created a glowing effect of the softest yellow. The tall shadow moved forth and gently slid the door open, his sun-kissed hair almost merging with the glow for a few seconds. One by one, the other 3 shadows followed, showing themselves as the forms of people. Children, in fact, perhaps none of them older than 11. The air of them all seemed to have somewhat of a serious, yet comedic, effect. The silver-haired boy seemed to have his thoughts firmly planted in the ground, whereas a raven-haired child seemed to have it amongst the clouds. In between them both was a female girl, looking from them both with a bored expression. "Excuse me," came a calm voice from their leader, the leader of Team 7. In the future, perhaps their team would be called Team Minato or Team Namikaze, but for now, it was just 7. In a different world and a different dimension, 7 is the epitome of luck. Yet, sometimes history never made it so. "Have you seen a teen this big?" began the tan-haired female, Rin, as she stretched her arms as tall as she could go, and this skinny. Her hands then moved in a direction where they showed someone who was not too skinny, but definitely one who worked out. After a few moments, it seemed that she was trying to rack her brain for more useful information. "Oh, and he has super blonde hair, like Sensei's," she added with a point. Minato chuckled slightly in his mind while shacking his head to and fro a bit. It was a slight gesture that signified he thought that description was rather odd, but it worked. The shorter man with jet black hair took a quick glance towards their forehead protectors and then mumbled something about trying to recall where the lad's room was. After a few moments, the innkeeper called out the words of room 267 feet, which was a normal, one-person bedroom. It was one of the cheaper rooms in this small, tiny inn. One by one, the members of Team 7 marched forwards and formed up in a line. Minato was towards the front. Since discovering the identity of this, Naruto Uzumame was now a B-rank mission. The blonde hair that hung towards the sides of his face swayed as he took small and inaudible steps. The man could still remember those words exchanged when his team met the Sandaime to speak about the mysterious child. "Well, what do you have to report?" came the small call as the aged, but not necessarily old, leader of the village hidden in the leaves took a deep breath from his pipe. The white smoke billowed out from the bowl-like end of it, dissipating in the air above. It was almost late afternoon, soon to be rushing into the evening, and Minato had a feeling placed off a bit about a certain teenager. Kakashi spoke up first, using his normal, informative voice. The adult knew of the reason as to why this small, silver-haired child was so keen on keeping towards the laws of a ninja, yet sometimes, when asked about some information, Hokage-sama, he started to explain that he knew of a team called Team 7. Except there has been very little Team 7s, to begin with, isn't that right, Minato? Another exhale of tobacco came from the man who was asking the question. The Sandaime was never one to smoke something strong or bitter. A sweet scent of some herbs that was mixed with the plant could be whiffed in the air. Minato subconsciously moved his nose a bit before answering back. As Konoha is perhaps only a few generations old, young for a shinobi nation, there have only been about 7 to 5 that fit in a 15-year time span. Considering that one does not remember until the age of 3 or 4. Minato trailed his statement off, trying to see if his team could pick up on this little tad bit of information. The black-haired Obito Uchiha answered first, which seemed to have come off as a minute shock towards Kakashi. Since 2 Team 7s have died by the time Naruto was at least 4, it would place about 4 to 3 teams left that he could have possible memory of. However, all of the ones before us have disbanded or died cuz we are the current team. Yet, began Rin slowly, thinking her way towards this as well, he responded greatly towards our faces, but most importantly Kakashi-kun's face. Even going to the point of calling him Sensei, a name like his isn't exactly one you see every day tied towards the end of Kakashi-kun. But this Naruto seemed to be in full belief of his words. He is very suspicious, finally added the high-level Chunin, Kakashi himself. It took a few moments, but he suddenly shut himself up and promptly left everyone. His stance seemed of great nervousness and his speed stated that he needed to get out the area and fast. Too fast for an untrained civilian. I have a feeling he was fearing recognition. The Hokage took a deep sigh and then stood up before turning around to face the glass windows. The sun was setting, and the deep reds and oranges were filling the sky, casting a soft, golden glow. Night was to befall them within an hour or so. A blonde shinobi nodded at all 3 members of his team for having good deductions. Even he wasn't quite certain about whom Uzumame was. This team effort deduction was well thought, but not yet finished. Sandaime turned around then, rubbing his temples slightly. As you may or not know, we have no records of Naruto ever being a leaf shinobi, and there are no documents on his existence either. This could come to the conclusion that he could be a spy for the other nations in. Kakashi glared a bit, frowning behind his mask. Minato could see the small fabric creases. This could come to the conclusion, Hokage-sama? There is more information betting on the thoughts that he is a spy of some sort. Perhaps Iwa itself. It was somewhat of a rash call, and both of the adults knew it, but at least the child's voice was not raised in a tone of anger. Placing his hand down on Kakashi's shoulder, the Namikaze shook his head back and forth. We cannot assume one is a spy directly because they are not one from Konoha's records. He could be a refugee in this time of war, making a lie so he could gain asylum. Perhaps a refugee for Iwa itself, frightened that we might kill him if we found out. There are too many gaps right now, and not enough information. As it is, our own information on our own troops are lacking a bit due to the clutter and chaos of war. Which is why I am giving Team 7 this mission, calmly stated the Sandaime. It's a low B rank, perhaps, as we have no idea of Naruto's skills. You are to try to find out about his past, as a personal request for Konoha. As for the actual war itself, it is still too dangerous to send you in. This includes you, too, Minato. Your unique jutsu is beginning to become a bit known, so I think it is wise to hide it until things become more serious and you perfect it. With that, they were dismissed, ready to begin their new mission dealing with a certain blonde, blue-eyed, tall teen who claimed to be a Konoha nin. You know, began Obito as they started their search for the child, if he really is a spy, he's gotta be one hell of an actor. Rin punched him. Here's his. Minato came alert, suddenly covering Kakashi's mouth and mentioned to not move or make a single noise. Through the wooden and paper door came the slightly audible jumble of words. This room that Naruto rented was to be of a single person, and the shadows indicated thus. Yet, why was there something akin to a conversation going on in there? Hada mean you, don't know, arg. Some, all-powerful, being you are, came a mock cry. Rin managed to toss a small look of confusion towards her teammates, who were looking back with a rather odd expression as well. Even Minato was lost, but his face retained its calm disposition. What is going on? He thought, adjusting himself slightly in order to hear better. However, he kept the rest of his team in their same positions. I heard that, came the cry once more. He froze for a few moments, thinking that the Uzumame had heard his students, but then the silhouette of the child just moved further away. Gesh, you would think that after this past year or so he would learn. I could hear those minute grumbles. There seemed to be a soft sigh, but even that was hard to hear because of the door. The last sentence, however, made it seem like a normal conversation of reassurance to oneself, but the few statements before that. The form moved towards the left a bit, and through the shadows one could see the arms reach up and untie the forehead protector. The outline of the hair fell down a bit, turning into a messier, yet balanced shape. Dang, I forgot to buy pajamas. Good thing this hotel has rentals. There was some more silence as the shadow quickly changed into what Minato concluded was the said PJs. There was a sound of a little plop as the shadow fell out of the paper's viewable port, but the rare sound still fluttered through. Ah. Gama-chan has its bulge all gone. Darn it, how am I supposed to get money if they don't really believe I am a ninja? I need those ranked missions. With a grunt, there was a thump, and then the lights were turned off. With a flick of his wrist, the blonde leader silently told everyone to pull back. Once in the far edge of the hallway, they left the inn, saying thanks towards the innkeeper, who just gave a nod before turning attention towards a new-coming customer. Once they reached the dead of night outside, the four figures walked away for a bit before reaching an isolated intersection. One single lamp from a store was all that gave light, and even then it was hard to see the figures. Well, that was enough for today, began Minato as he placed his hands in his pockets. He tried to place the information into something that made at least a little bit of sense, but it was rather difficult with that tad bit of a conversation. What he had originally planned to do was to sneak into the room, but the child was still awake and not in a deep sleep. I don't believe he heard us, so that puts that his words could be accurate and not a false. Then again, we don't know for sure. He could be a little bit not so right in the head, sensei, exclaimed Obito right before Rin pummeled her fist down rather hard. Darn it, Obito. Minato sensei was trying to have an intellectual conversation. With a little movement, he placed his hand down on both of his team's shoulder and gave them a small smile. Now, everyone, he began, looking at everyone with his blue eyes. We at least managed to gather that he was, or is, some type of ninja, but his words seem to have no harm at this current moment. In fact, it makes it sound like all he wants to do is work for his money. Kakashi nodded a little bit, turning his head to face the general direction where the inn was. From that single source of stealth data, I have to agree that it reinforces the fact that he could be a refugee. However, there are still far too many holes in our investigation. On top of that, those mocking words he said at someone or something were very interesting. With a little nod, the blonde adult turned to face the edge of the street. We will meet again tomorrow on the southern bridge at noon. I want all of you to try to gain some ideas on how to approach this mission without being detected by Naruto Uzumame. As a last note, he gave each and every single one of his students a smile. Good night, and I hope none of you get in trouble for staying out this late. It was late, but not entirely late. For small children with parents, they were already scuttled off towards their covers, letting their minds wander off towards the land of dreams. For adults, they still had more of the night to live and endure. If one was a clan leader, They might have had a different night than most adults, but the theory was the same. The darkness was a time to think alone. X. The moonlight danced through the windows of his small home. He had no clan, but he did have a decent-sized building floor from saving little pieces of reuse over time. It was still a place to call home, at least. With a little sigh, he sat down and placed himself on a couch, staring at the ceiling for a few moments. He could hear the soft sounds of the night creatures whisper amongst themselves for a bit. After a few moments, he sat back up and then walked towards one of his training rooms. Flipping on the switch, blue eyes casually glanced towards the area where he had stored some of his new, special kunai. Pulling one out, he took a little look at it. Being three-pronged, it was more difficult to handle than a normal kunai. He smiled a bit as to why he thought of three instead of using simple one-edged, but decided that this new jutsu of his would have to stand out a bit. Like a bit of a signature mark, he mused softly. On the gripping handle, there was some sort of weatherproof paper to write a seal into, but as of yet, it was empty. His Hiraishin no jutsu was still a bit incomplete. The markings of a seal he had currently could only work on objects that had enough space to fit the seal itself, and a kunai grip was still too small. Kunais were the best way to use his jutsu at its full potential, as he had planned it to so that the metal objects didn't need to hit their targets in order for him to go from place to place. He had been trying to condense the markings for a few months already, as well as working on Jiraiya-sensei. I know you were there, he sighed a bit, before placing his hands down and giving forth his own sensei a smile. What brings you all the here back to Konoha? There was a little puff of smoke as a tall, white-haired male in his late 30s puffed in, scowling a little bit. Is it wrong of me to try to take a little look at my still single, but my favorite student? Oh, I am so hurt right now, he added, bringing his hand towards his chest. The man turned left and right, then smirked a bit. I declare that you need a girl right about now. This can't be all you do at night. Jiraiya-sensei. Sometimes carrying a serious conversation was difficult. X. Soft noises of water slowly dripping echoed throughout this plane of existence. What this was the inner workings of a mind and soul. A place where two entities would meet with each other and more than often, argue. Tonight, a small, teenaged figure stood right before a large, bronze-like cage, held together with no lock, but a little slip of paper. It read the character of seal upon it. This was the first time in a while that he actually stepped within this room, and naturally for a good reason as well. The evil and malice that enveloped this room was something that filled the air into an almost solid state. He did not come here on purpose, he almost never did. The lack of light made his hair almost seem orange in color as the shadows remained pitch black. Rising up his eyes, he took a little glance at the seal mark, and froze. Oh, the seal still existed, but was transparent. Almost as if it was a ghostly image and that sent sudden shivers down his spine. A silent whisper went through his throat, but it refused to come out. The seal. It's about time you see for yourself, Naruto. Of course, I had to drag you in here to begin with. A small, yet evil chuckle resonated throughout the area. All the blonde could do was stare at the paper. Being translucent, his eyes could see the metal gates behind it. He was a little bit surprised earlier in the day at the simplicity of calling upon the Kyuubi's voice to ask those few questions about where he was, but never thought of it beyond those few moments. Now he wished he had. It couldn't be broken now, though, it couldn't, and Naruto knew that. He was still himself, with his blue eyes and 6 thin lines across his face. He tried his hardest to let himself become removed from being frozen his place, but all he managed was a slight shiver. Wham! A large, crimson claw hit the cage. To Naruto's horror, the front doors budged the slightest of centimeters before reverting back towards their original position. The small paper still hung there, showing no change except for still being as transparent as before. Frightened? You have no need to do so, Naruto, it growled as red steam came pulsing out of the bars. I've been trying since I noticed that little unique tweak in the seal. However, no matter how hard I try, Naruto could only jump back as the sound of a tail hit the bars as hard as it could. Like before, it moved only a few centimeters. Never more, never less. It always reaches only a fraction of a mere movement. But, we both know that it could have never done this before, right, Naruto? The Biju finished that last word with a deep sense of malice. The teen managed to gather his courage back up after his prior movement when he saw the tail flail about. "What did you do to the seal?" he cried out, anger boiling. He was confused and very irritant at this moment. Narrowing his eyes, he made a fist, almost piercing his normal fingernails into his skin. "I did nothing. If anything, Naruto, I should be thanking you. It was because of you that we are in an area where I have more influence over your small, mortal body. No longer are we in a land where you or this seal exist until a few days ago." The Kyuubi laughed evilly before the eye slits met Naruto's own gaze. The sound stopped when the demon revealed its sharp, pointy teeth. "Of course, the Yondaime's seal has to still be here as you fell in this land from your own, but perhaps I will eventually." "So you knew where I was all along," Naruto screamed out, preventing the monster from continuing its talk. It was entering a dangerous subject. It was not one that the teen was eager to jump into. What he knew and cared about was that the entity and soul was still infused with his, unable to escape. "I don't always have to tell you the truth, Naruto," the Kyuubi finished. With a wave of chakra, Naruto was plunged out of that place and landed. He threw open his eyes and gasped as the pulled his hand over his head to block the sun's rays from piercing into his brain. He cried out, throwing the back of his head into the pillow once more. "Today's gonna suck, I can tell." Sometimes, on the clearest of days, when the water in the lake is at its calmest, a being could see its own reflection staring right back. On the darkest of nights, with only the stars providing slight amounts of light, a being could see the reflection in the lake as well. However, unlike the day, the reflection in the night shows what a being truly believes in oneself. If one were to think she was nice and fair, their night reflection will appear towards their mental eye. A reflection that is not of reality, but bent by the mind's will. If one were to believe that she was a monster in the inside, no matter how subconsciously, that image may appear in their mental eye as well. If two entities were to look at once, one may look at another's reflection and see something vastly different than the original person themselves. This is the true powers of the mental mind, able to project mere thoughts into something that one could believe is the truth. Yet, the sunlight hitting the surface of a silent lake is sometimes dispelled when a lone stranger comes over and stands by the edge. In the sense of small and mere ripples, they eventually die, extending their energy to try to reach all edges of its boundaries. The lone stranger, however, can give such ripples a new life by simply bending over and picking up a smooth, new rock. Tossing it into the water, if one were to skip it, more than one central series of ripples will be made, much different than the first set. Though all stemming from the same source, it is the caster of the stone who truly controls the fate of each tiny ripple as they race off ahead towards the shore and their surrounding areas. The sun, shining high above, was the only significant mention that it was to be breakfast time. Like the proclamation made only an hour ago, the day was indeed to be ugly. Dark, ominous clouds hanged over the edge of the horizon, flashing white every once in a while. The air itself seemed to hold in a breath, not daring to bring forth another wisp of movement. Such things were not unnoticed by the citizens of a place they called Konoha. Some of the bodies left towards their homes, but others merely shrugged and proceeded on. In one of the farther edges of the town resided a small, inconspicuous inn. A teenager was already changed into his normal, and much-loved, outfit of two simple colors: black and orange. Around his head was a tightly strung forehead protector, holding back some of his bangs of messy, sun-lit hair. Without an object like that, the hair would fall around his head, creating something like a halo of golden hair. Etched into the metal itself was a small, weird little spiral-like symbol of the village hidden in the leaves. It was the same village that was about to get pounded soon with a storm. Raising his hands up, he took a quick glance at the mirror. Yup. Everything was there, and water was not something to be worried about when it came towards the clothing he wore. They could stand more things than normal clothes, or so the woman who sold him the cloth claimed. With the mindset of achieving something important today, he headed off towards the front of the inn. Taking the small, frog-shaped money container, he mentally counted what he had left. After buying new clothes, some nights at the inn, and food for himself, he still had a decent amount left. However, decent was never really enough. He needed a place to stay, and money to afford it. On top of that, the seal. He mentally shivered for a few seconds. The blonde's normal happy face fell into a frightened, serious one. In only a matter of seconds though, a determined look was restored within his eyes. He was going to hold that demon back at bay. He'll show that Kyuubi. There was some more time left before it was time to eat lunch, and breakfast was something else he had to fill his stomach with. It was a great time to stop by his favorite place, but he would have to take the long way around, through the ground, because he still had to look for areas to get a job. Preferably, it would a ninja job of a rank, but that would, of course, bring upon more questions than he would like. As it was, the Yondaime was showing his head up and around more than once. As well as his team, mused Naruto as he had his hand up towards his chin in a thinking fashion. For now, it could be said as mere coincidence, but he knew better than that right now. Okay, sure, maybe 2-3 years ago he would have thought nothing of it. With a quick shake of his head, he walked out into the street, ignoring the rain. What was a little bit of wet stuff falling from the sky going to do to him? Pierce him or something? In front of him was the highly cluttered street alleys of Konoha, filled with a gray mist as the streaks of rain gently fell down from the sky. In the background, people who were getting ready to sell things were either setting up some form of covers, or running around to find a form of cover. It seemed like an average wet morning in the village hidden in the leaves. Well, average towards the normal eye. For some reason, Naruto noticed that around every single main roadway, there seemed to be some form of ninja standing there like a form of guard. The shinobi would look around and analyze the heads of the people, giving them all a look, including the blonde teen himself. What was weird that the head kept looking back and forth, looking at the expressions and footwork. It took a few moments before he also realized that there were these small black dots, or it looked like black dots through the rain, walking around on the edge of the pale, yellow walls that surrounded the village. It was subtle, but it was sorta of like the days right before Konoha got invaded by Suna and Otto. Duh, he said out loud, slapping his head upon his forehead. He had forgotten about the great shinobi wars, again. It was so difficult, being in an apparent different time zone, living with older information. Except, this older information was something vague to him. When he was in the academy, it was all old stuff to him. Stuff that he didn't even want to pay attention to, as it was a bunch of things related to old men who sat on their rocking chairs, claiming those were the days. Now, he desired even more that he had listened to Iruka-sensei. Jiraiya-sensei. You're drunk. Nonsense. I was just sleeping. With a small sigh and a shake of the head, the one known as Minato Namikaze stood up from the couch and walked over towards the kitchen as the sounds of the white-haired man went back into snoring. Often the blonde man wondered if something short of the apocalypse would awaken the Elder One on time. Well, it's somewhat his fault as he was the one who insisted on going to drink some sake. He knew I never drink that stuff, except there he goes. Sensei. Breakfast was simple. Just some tiny onigiris with tuna centers and a glass of orange juice. He would have had milk, but he had some of that for dinner as well, and orange juice was still good. As soon as the meal was done, he calmly walked up towards the sink and washed the few dishes before putting them away. The kitchen was small on itself, providing very little space, but it was enough. Minato never really had to cook enough for more than 2 people at the most, and the second one was his sensei. Grabbing a little, small scroll, he wrote down in nothing but pure hiragana to tease his teacher for a little bit. It was rather simple, just claiming that he was going out to meet his team and that he better not see his home destroyed, overrun with frogs, or with punch holes from women that were victimized by a certain pervert. Slapping it on the head of his sensei, he could only sigh as Jiraiya refused to move. If anything, he snored just a little bit, keeping his eyes shut. Same, old Jiraiya. Outside, he realized that it was going to rain. The clouds were rolling in, rather heavily, already beginning to block out the sun's rays. There was a slight wind picking up, moving the small ruffles of his hair a bit as he walked down the path towards the bridge where he was to meet his team. On normal days, he would not eat breakfast so late, but last night was not normal, of course. He hadn't seen his old teacher in months, so it was a nice, if sometimes awkward, meeting. By the time he made it towards the red-painted piece of architecture, a small drizzle haze filled the sky. Like expected, his team arrived there on time. Well, that is, all of them minus. Sorry I am late everyone, came a little cry from the black-haired Uchiha. He chuckled a bit, rubbing the back of his head. See, there was this cabbage cart that collapsed, so I had to go and fix. Dope. Stop making such livid claims. You should know better than that, came the collective speech from Kakashi. Minato could only shake his head. It was like this all the time. Obito would arrive late, Kakashi would scold him, and then Rin would punch him a bit. Then he would come in and prevent it from going any further. Alright everyone, I think that is enough. We still have a mission to finish and do, so I prefer not to start with bulges on a certain Uchiha head. With a slight smile, he nodded at every single person for a few moments, before pointing off towards the distance. I think that today is a good day to see what type of subjects Uzumaki does on such days like this. Remember that the best way to know an enemy is by studying their habits. As of yet, they were still undecided whether or not his strange person was an enemy, so saying words with such connotation was not exactly appropriate. However, letting a sense of security overwhelm them was not a good thing either. It was best to go in a neutral state of things when relating to topics like this. With a little hand gesture from him, they all ran off towards the edge of the city, keeping in mind that the rain was a well cover over some minute noises as well as their shapes. Of course, the best place to begin such a search would be inside the inn, but a quick glance at the innkeeper just shook his head. The man seemed to know that the Team 7 was interested in the young teen, and he had explained that the blonde had left off towards the outside. A couple of hours had already passed, and the rain didn't seem like it wanted to let up. Since the outside was still painted in the grays and silvers, Minato had dismissed them for lunch, but were expected to return within an hour at the bridge yet again. With a few steps, avoiding the ever-growing puddles, there was something that didn't seem right about this certain day. More certainly, this precise hour. It seemed to nag at the back of his mind, like an itch that was unable to be reached unless with an extended piece of metal or wood. Take a deep breath before sighing slight, his blue eyes surveyed the area, looking for some place to stop by and eat. He could return home and talk to his teacher, but had decided that maybe that man was probably still asleep upon the couch. Eventually, the time passed and the team met up again. However, it seemed like luck was on Obito's side. "I found him!" happily exclaimed the oddball Uchiha, with a large smile plastered on his face. His finger was pointing off towards the far edge, seemingly mocking Kakashi, who had left towards the opposite area. He was walking through the stores, looking around. "Seemed pretty harmless to me. I think he was looking for something, 'cause he has that face that you have when you want to look for something, sensei." Rin, who had slightly widened eyes at the fact that the raven-haired boy arrived on time for once, only took a look at both the teacher and the pupil. "Well, sensei does have a unique face when he tries to find something, but that's 'cause it's something serious. That guy didn't seem like someone who has a serious and calm personality." The taller man waved his hands around in the rain, trying to bring this conversation towards a close. The only one who hadn't uttered a word was none other than Kakashi, who usually stayed quiet for everything, not really dealing with the mission. Of course, talking back to Obito was something else as well, but still. "Alright. Now since Obito had discovered where the Uzumaki is, I suggest we head off towards there and keep watch. Treat this as a stealth mission and try not to be seen by him too often." "What about you, sensei?" wondered the silver-haired child. His blue mask was still on, turning a darker color than the sky around at this moment. All in all, now that Minato thought about it, everyone was well dressed in colors and hues that prevented others from noticing them. Only the blonde's hair seemed to not blend in with the surroundings, standing like the color of the bright sun. "I am going to go eat some lunch, or at least it will look like I am only doing that. Since the only place nearby is some dangos, I think I'll have that and some green tea as well." Naruto Uzumaki was someone else entirely. He had the same eyes as his sensei, had the same colored hair as his sensei, has the same skin tone as his sensei, had the same hairstyle as his sensei, except had the attitude that consisted of someone completely opposite of his sensei. Such attitude was apparent, especially with his constant smile that stretched across the face. He seemed really excited about something, except, something also seemed on the teen's mind when he stared off towards the walls still hidden in the falling rain. His forehead protector was still there, glistening slightly with the sheen of rain. He's probably antsy about some attack coming in from Iwa, like everyone else, he mused slightly, getting closer towards the teen. He was considered an upper chunin, borderline junin, and his stealth skills were excellent. Naturally, there was no way that a teen like that could sense him. Maybe his teammates. Minus his sensei, of course, but not him. There were some slight noises in the background. In the teenager's hands was a small stack of papers, all in different forms of scripts, like kanji, hiragana, and even one that seemed to be completely out of katakana. Perhaps a business wanted a little too much attention, as such characters were sometimes an eyesore. The background noises were getting a bit louder. The direction the teen faced seemed to imply that he was heading back towards the inn, which was a great thing because it was already getting late. The sunlight was beginning to slowly filter away from the clouds, which had pierced through very slightly in order to make the world appear gray instead of black. Everything had this slight darker tinge, which made it easier to hide his body. More clutter noises in the background. It was getting harder to ignore them. His object of interest, the Uzumame, continued to walk, arching his head over towards the sound for a few brief seconds before shacking his head and beginning to walk off towards the section of the village where his room was. The road seemed to be in a bad state, turning into a primitive form of a muddy river, and that was when Kakashi noted that this guy must have had some form of ninja training. For, you see, he was protecting the papers by covering them with chakra. It took a while for him to notice because the rain was not smearing the ink across the pages, and he hadn't looked there at that moment. A man ran into the middle of the road, and began to call out for Minato. Wait. His sensei jumped out of wherever he was hiding, and instantly the air seemed to change. Even the teenager had stopped, for Minato had basically phased right in front of his face. The man who started the whole commotion had his hands gripped towards the side, and had a stone face. What's going on? He thought, jumping out of his spot as well to stand next towards his teacher. Following his example, Rin and Obito came out of their area as well, each of them with a face of confusion. And the Iwa Nins have already crossed some inner parts of Fire Country's borders. They came in a swarm, using the earthly colors of their uniforms to enter and blend with the surroundings. On top of that, some of the Anbu teams that were surveying that area have gone missing, presumed dead. We need you and anyone else who can help try to enter the countryside and either defeat them, or shove them back into a retreat. This is their first major offensive. I invaded, screamed out the blonde teen. Fire Country's being invaded. His body language made it apparent that he was teething with anger, and his eyes were set in the same manner as his sensei's when he was really angry. Minato's face was filled with nothing but pure comprehension of the seriousness of the statement. I'm going to the north gate. Rin and Obito, you go home and make sure that the rest of the citizens know about this. Kakashi, you are to come with me as you have more capabilities and... Naruto burst himself in at this moment, screaming and pointing at the adult man. I'm going as well. I'm not about to let Konoha be invaded again. In the world, there are many definitions of the word for race. For some, the word race stands for people of different ethnicities. That, in all, is a rather well summary as it is the most general one of them all. It stands for the origins of certain families, tracing history down many levels to find the core of all culture and the basis of thought. It could also be the reason as to why people would run around and proclaim one to be inferior. There are even those who believe that their own family was a race of its own, a highly superior race that none other could go and comprehend of their value and importance over everything else. It was just the mindsets of people, based off some inner, primitive thing, as well as the lacking of a true, good heart. Those who could see beyond the concept of a race were a rare and sure blessing upon the world, and a certain figure with the sky as eyes was the entombment of that ideal. Yet, there is the other term for a race. This term was for those who had to reach a goal, or an end. It was something that meant that speeds that was usually not normal for the average citizens of a town. In some cases, a race was nothing more than a spectator sport of one person against another for friendly means. This race was something else. It was a race against time itself as three blurs were heading off towards the only road that would lead out of the village hidden in the leaves, the town of Konoha. In a sense, there were more ways out through what was called non-civilian means, but the best way in and out was through the main gate located towards the north. Towards the far distance, the characters of were glistening softly in the raining mist. Though it was late morning, the clouds that kept around the heavenly ceiling were crying just as much as they were earlier in the morning. One of the blur's blue eyes pierced off towards the distance with steel. It was not an expression that this teenager usually wore as he was outgoing and generally more cheerful. Today, however, a race had begun. Two other figures didn't exactly want him to hang around, but his determination won out in the end. Whether they wanted to or not, a teen from a different plane of time was going to help. And somewhere, Far away, the ripple of such time waned. Just a bit, perhaps, but it was significant enough to change a small detail. For something called indestructible and always continuous, even it must have backdoors and hidden weakness. Naruto pressed his Zori down on the ground, jumping from one red shingled building towards another. On normal days, he would have been running around and admiring the views from such a height, but not this moment. His footprint left splintering wood. While not necessarily the smartest thing to do outside of a ninja village, inside it was all right. After all, the race was still continuing, an endless battle for the reaches of the northern skirts of the town. Konoha was built in a defensive manner. Towards the far south were the large mountains that created the base for the Hokage monument. Though not tall enough to be called snowy caps, they were taller than the hills which surrounded the village. All around was a large, thick wall that was able to stand up towards anything a civilian could throw against it, as well as spots for Junin to see far beyond and look towards the horizon. One could see for miles if it was not for the rain that was steadily falling down. "Minato-sensei," came the serious tone of Kakashi as they raced from area to area in the mists. "Where are we going towards?" The gates, which the blonde-haired teenager knew was towards the north, were a bit of a distance from them. Especially since it seemed like they were going a few miles west from them. With a quick turn, Naruto saw a face that he recognized as something plastered upon the monument. The serious gaze. Except this time, it was in pure color, allowing those blue eyes to pierce into both of their very souls. His golden side hairs flowed in the rushing wind as he kept on leading the way. The same sort of confusion was on the other figure. He had jet black hair as well as black eyes that gleamed slightly. Unlike Kakashi, he was wearing the Konoha vest, and it was apparent that it was packed with scrolls at the last minute. "Minato-san, I must ask to as why you are heading this way as well. Iwa was clearly invading from the north, but we are still in Konoha. We should be going off with the other Uchiha and protect the borders wi." With a quick and verbal action, the taller man quieted him with a single look. "I need to pick up some necessary things at my home, Fugaku. It will be very crucial in the times to come. Besides, Jiraiya should still be there." Naruto stared straight on ahead, a little stunned by those words, but he tried his hardest to not make it show. He had never heard of a guy called Fugaku, but Jiraiya was a totally different story. First, it was the Yondaime to be, then it was his old teacher Kakashi, and now it's Jiraiya. Waves of past memories slapped him across the mental face, but he allowed himself to continue further and dismiss those thoughts for now. Saving Konoha was more important. And of all things, this nobody decides to come with us. For all we know. "Enough," barked out Minato as his glare grew slightly towards the black-haired man. "Naruto Uzumaki decided to do this by himself, and Konoha has no time for this." Whipping his head back towards the silver-haired teen, he motioned his head towards the distance. "Kakashi, take them off for now. Don't exit through the gate, rather, head towards the guard tower way over there. I'll meet you there in a few seconds. Full pace it, and take Fugaku Uchiha with you, as well as Naruto." Then, the man just disappeared. He just, flashed away. If the teen would have blinked, he would have missed the residue yellow light that seemed to hover in the rain before, too, dissipating. "Even with the Sharingan I couldn't see it," came a soft mutter of awe from the elder man next to Naruto. He was in shock, and a small part of his brain registered that the speed was surreal. "Had I known of this technique sooner, I would have eaten him first. Or rather, eaten you before all of this mess has started. That way, I could have used that blonde fool of a mortal as a toothpick," growled the Biju in his head. It had a voice of amusement, like one would have over deciding whether to have miso or meat-based ramen for lunch. It was rather unsettling still that the demon now seemed to have freer access to his thoughts. Dismaying it away, he kept his eyes set towards the looming figure. However, once they arrived there, waiting for them was none other than Minato. He was carrying a small scroll, holding it in his hands like it was something that was worth its weight in gold. Behind him was a small, tiny patch of paper no larger than a small ramen bowl that had strange markings all over it. It was almost like some sort of seal-shaped thing. Whatever the case, his appearance stunned them all. "I am beginning to see how the citizens and some shinobis are calling you the Yellow Flash," came a small mutter from Kakashi. Mentally, Naruto slapped his head again. Of course the move was so fast. It was that high something move that was made this man in front of him just short of a Konoha deity. Rapidly changing his thoughts, he turned around to see Jiraiya appear a few moments later in a flurry of leaves. Jiraiya, he's a good man for weakening the seal, little mortal, came the dripping voice. I really do like him, was the evilly tipped afterthought. The white-haired man took a quick glance at Naruto and raised his eyes. Something seemed to register in the man's brain, but he quickly turned over and took that serious face that the golden-haired teen had rarely seen before. I can't believe I haven't heard of any of this. There have been rumors in the country, but in general, nothing has leaked through of this magnitude. With a little nod, Minato turned his gaze towards Naruto and the silver-haired child. Kakashi, take Naruto with you and travel a different path from Jiraiya and myself. We will meet up on that town with the hot springs in order to have more land spotted for Iwa Nin. If you run into any trouble, remember that whoever it is will be of a rank of at least High Chunin. You may be close to a Junin, but Uzumame is undecided. Fugaku, travel with the rest of the Uchiha in the direct route. Jiraiya and I will try to do an ambush. Leave now. And with that, everything moved away in the mist. Kakashi inwardly sulked. He was being babysitter, not to just anyone, but his sensei's whiskered clone. But, as an order from Minato-sensei, he was going to listen to it. It was also his job mission, and he would always do that without fail, no matter what had to be done to him physically and mentally. Quietly, they both continued, running off towards the far distance that was the border areas. The speed that Kakashi was going at was rather intense, so he hoped the blonde could keep up. And he did. Not only did the team keep up, but was outpacing Kakashi, the genius. Forcing perhaps a little too much chakra to be considered a safe technique, as they still have to go on further many miles, the silver child raced onwards. It seemed as if the blonde ignored the need for some things like rest or solider pills, because he just kept on going. Not allowing himself to be bested, he forced himself to go on. The worry and fear over the balance between Konoha and Iwa's possible confrontation cutting into him like a steel blade. If only I had that Chidori move something relatively close to being completed. He yelled out in his mind. It would be a great help. Not only that, but something in the pit of his stomach was bothering him. Like something bad. It was silent for a few moments as Naruto edged closer towards the group of Iwa Nin. He could tell from their faces that none of them were really set on having peaceful negotiations with Konoha, nor turn around and go back from the land they came from. Hell, he didn't know why the war between Konoha and Iwa began. Maybe it was 'cause the cage of that land decided to run off and attack Konoha for something retarded. Like land, can't people get more or less along? Well, maybe not now. It was such a great idea to think such things. The men that Kakashi and he were watching were all alert, and none of them seemed like weak shunins. Each one of them strong, and ready to kill something, anything. In his hand, he had a kunai, its sharp, metal edge looking dull in the falling rain. Though Iwa Nin were strong in the aspects of Daiden, the earth style, ninjutsu, the rain was a bad streak of luck for them. However, it had hidden them rather well. So well, in fact, that the team of two had nearly run into them. The distance was rather far from Konoha, but not as close towards the border as one would have hoped. Naruto clenched his hands together, narrowing his eyes and giving the enemy ninjas a hard look. They were still hidden safely among the trees, but it was getting to be hard to keep up with the pace while staying as silent as possible. Kakashi had stated that it would be best if they followed them for a bit to see if they would lead towards bigger numbers of their group, or say something interesting, but as of yet, they were entirely silent. All of the tension was making him fret, wanting to take them down for invading his homeland, whether he was born yet or not. The small child behind the teen shuffled about and made a sudden movement that only Naruto could tell. Kakashi had stated that if he made a movement, it was time to begin other means of getting some information out. Kunais flashed about as the sounds of the Iwa Nin deflecting them filled the small area between the trees in a matter of moments. Some screaming and confusion noises erupted, but the blonde-haired teen knew exactly what to do. Torturing other ninjas was something he would never think of doing on normal occasions, so even then he was a bit hesitant. But he forcefully pushed that aside, locking it up with a little mental wall. He had to help Konoha. Find those Konoha nins. With a blur, Kakashi sped forwards with his kunai in his hand and a sword strapped towards his back. The silver hair whistled in the wind as Naruto saw him speed off towards a target. He would have watched a bit more, but there was still another Iwa nin hanging around that Naruto had to take care of. Placing his hands in a single seal, he softly muttered out, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." With small puffs, about 5 copies of him were ready. With a silent order, he made them run ahead, but left one with him just in case. Clanging noises could be heard as the shadow clones were fighting one man. Naruto was close, having his hand in his kunai holder, ready to pull one out just in case. His shadow clone was on his rear end, watching for anything in the background. The Iwa nin was blocking all of the kunai attacks from the copies, sweating and with his face angry. No words were exchanged as the fight was going on. One by one, the copies poofed away from existence. Running out from the bushes as the man did the last sweep against the lone standing clone, Naruto raced forwards and plunged his kunai into the man's abdomen. Blood spluttered out, oozing down the side as the enemy ninja changed his face from anger towards sudden pain and confusion. He was, however, still able to move until a yellow blur fell down and stabbed a sharpened kunai horribly into the man. Silence reigned once again as Naruto stood up and dismissed the clone that had finished the job. The Iwa nin was alive, but would die eventually. It was what Kakashi had stated was the right thing to do for now, and though it was not in normal behavior of him, they were going to have to get info somehow. The two men glared, all heavily injured. The one Kakashi had fought against seemed more hurt than the one that the teenager had bashed around, but they were both unable to move. And once this was done, I can't believe we were caught by the so-called yellow flash, came a mutter from one of them as they glared drill holes into Naruto's skull before coughing out some blood laced with mucus. Pulling out a kunai, he gave the two of them a hard face, holding out the sharp metal object in front of their thoughts. I am Naruto Uzumame, not Minato Namikaze. And, we would like to know what the hell you Iwa nin are thinking of doing. Kakashi already had his kunai by the other man's throat, burying it in by a little bit. Tell us, or I will kill you in a horrible manner. Minato raced ahead, jumping from tree to tree as the rail fell upon his hair and clothing. Right behind him was his sensei, Jiraiya. They had yet to run into any sort of enemy disturbances, but they must be getting close. For a ninja's pace, the Fire Nation's border was a day away or so. The faster Iwa nins could have already perpetrated closer in than the en masse ones. This was why he was on this side. Normal ninjas would take the shortest route if they were slower, whereas the faster ones would try to be hidden and take the long way around. A smart idea, as it also made a searcher for such people have to travel more land to find them, whereas an enemy could just race towards the intended target. And that was Konoha, his precious town. Right in front of them was the looming area of a hot spring village. The rain made it hard to see for sure, but you can smell that as well, Jiraiya, came the soft voice from Minato as they continued side by side for protection. A single nod was the affirmation that was horrible to comprehend. It's smoke. Some branch of enemy shinobi must have breached by and attacked the town. If it smells this much right now, during all this rain, they might still be there, Minato. We don't know how many and... The white-haired man's voice trailed off as he saw the blonde man stop and pull something out from his Junin vest. It was a 3-pronged kunai, gleaming as if it was brand new in the falling rain. While we were running here, I realized something about my seal for a new move I have been practicing on. Something drastically important. The old one was too large to fit on the handle, but then it suddenly came to me. Placing his hand on the handle, he pushed some chakra into the piece of metal and then removed it. Right in front of the two faces was a series of symbols, the sign of a seal. If worse comes to worse, the adult man began, brushing the remaining seals on all of the kunais he had, I can always use this. On any other day, he would have been excited that he had finally managed to make the perfect seal to fit in the kunais, but now there was something else going on. This will be the catalyst for my Hiraishin no Jutsu. Thus, as the Iwa Konoha War, The Third Shinobi War looms upon them. A new legend was about to begin and a hero born in a fury of golden light and color. Heat. That was the best way to describe the world around them all. Two figures of nothing but shadows and blurs finally reached their destination. A city that was once filled with splendor and laughter of happy people relaxing. Today, though, as the sun was hidden behind layers of clouds, this once happy resort was now only a mere cry of its past. Everywhere rested nothing but wood scattered among the ground as the haze of both rain and fire mixed with each other. A teenager and a silver-haired child stood next to each other, only staring aghast at the horror in front of them. They were trained in the arts of killing and hiding emotion, but even the grotesque scene in front of them made the son of the White Fang widen his eyes. It was too horrible for words. An angry sound, something aligned to an angry animal cry, escaped from the blonde-haired one. It was filled with rage, that sound. Innocent people were harmed in this slaughter. All around they were fallen. Some even had a pose like as if they were trying to save themselves, but to no avail. Even in death, the bodies that littered around them had no peaceful look upon their faces. Closer towards the border, these people knew that it was an easier place to get invaded into, but they felt safe, surrounded by their springs of hot water. "Gee, this is terrible," came the small mutter from a certain Naruto, Uzumame. His blue eyes narrowed, scanning the area. He was going to get whoever did this to his home. He was a ninja from the land of fire, and he was going to protect it. He was, and is. He had to do something. All of this suffering that he witnessed the village people had come into shook him to his very soul. With a little sound of rustling leaves, Kakashi landed next towards Naruto and gave him a slight glare. On any other time, a certain teenager would have found it odd and funny to see a child glare at someone taller and older than them. "What are you doing?" he mentioned in a hushed voice. "We don't know where those Iwanin are, and from the looks of things, everything here has been rather recent. Get up so we can hide, for Kami's sake. You should have learned this while you were a genin," came the upset mutter at the end. Clenching his fists together, Naruto returned the look, but complied with what the young child had said. The words left from the man they had interrogated hanged in his head like a fresh, new mist. What they had learned did not come from the man easily, nor did he give a lot of information, but it was enough for a small grasp of the concept. From the man, the Iwanin coming in were not simply coming in to have a simple war for a bit more land. No, it was a full-blown scale invasion with the intent to raze everything towards the ground and take over Konoha and capturing its people. They wanted to prove that they were the strongest out of all of the shinobi villages before moving on and controlling the world. That, in itself, was something that made his blood boil as his eyes keep narrowing and narrowing. "Minato-sensei," came a surprised call from Kakashi as two ninjas appeared right in front of both of them. The sudden appearance of them managed to get the teenager to jump up and face both of them. Jiraiya was holding onto many kunai in his fingers by the small loop at the end, looking around the area with his eyes. They finally rested back towards Minato with a little nod of approval. The golden-haired man turned and faced ahead towards both of the younger ninjas, giving them a look that made the daze-like quality around them disappear into a harsh reality. "The Iwanin are still in this city. Jiraiya has managed to spot an area where most of them are, but this section of shinobis can't really be the full force of the army." He pulled out a small map and then placed his finger down towards where the town was located on. This town is actually pretty close towards the interiors of the Fire Nation. That must mean that only the fastest ones managed to make it this far. The majority of them must still be hanging around the northwest border. The man's finger trailed it way up towards the land that just shy of Kusagaku. "We are to get rid of all of the enemy ninjas before they can transverse any closer and attack our shinobi from the rear." With that, the golden-haired man turned his attention towards the only person that he knew almost nothing about in his student. "Naruto and Kakashi, you are now going to travel with Jiraiya and myself. Once we see some Iwanins, you are going to need to place yourselves in positions where you can gather as many ninjas as you can into one spot." With that, he dug into his pocket and pulled out some strange-looking kunai and handed it towards Jiraiya. "You will go with them in the background. There is just too few of us to go head-on-head, so I am going to use it when you throw the kunai over the mass of enemy ninja." Worry etched itself among the Sanin's face, but Naruto was too busy looking over towards the buildings around them to register that it was the same look that the arrow senin of his time gave to him once in a rare while. Minato, you might have used the jutsu before on missions, but this is the first time with a kunai implement. I know that you are assured with your own abilities, but... The man shook his head. It is risky for using a seal which was recently made smaller. But it should work, in theory, and I have no time to practice it. It has to work. Tension filled the air as Jiraiya gave a little nod, reluctantly allowing this to continue. What could the older man have done? Whatever the case, Kakashi landed right next towards the opposite side and nodded off towards the distance. There is more smoke billowing over there, sensei. I think they are about to head off towards the Konoha ninjas. Though the city filled with hot springs was cut off from any major city within an hour's pace, it was still too close for comfort. Like earlier, it was a small group of ninjas stalking others in a deadly game of hide and seek. One wrong noise and they would be surrounded with odds against their favor, even with the rain falling down upon them. The gray shadows hid them rather well, but it graced the enemy as well. It was a double-bladed sword, and a group of 4 had to sharpen it. Something wasn't right with the boy that looked like Minato. Jiraiya couldn't place it, but something wasn't right. He clutched onto the handle of the kunai and dashed forwards as his hair flew in the wind, trying to decide some thoughts that tossed in his mind. Yes, something was most certainly not right with that teenager boy. Ignoring that for a mere moment, he looked straight ahead where Minato had already discovered where the bulk of the ninjas were. He had to make sure that nothing bad happened, especially with a risky and untested new form of a technique. Minato, the one with the sun as hair, was the son he never had, and he would be damned if something happened to him. The Uzumame jumped ahead, for it was time for them to attract the attention of the Iwa Nin for a few crucial moments. Jiraiya could feel the sweat begin to slowly form as he saw the teenager race off and made a single symbol of the ram before copies poofed into existence. Then, those said copies transformed into different-looking Konoha ninjas. The action seemed to give the other 3 a small step back in surprise as Kage Bunshin no Jutsu was a Junin ninjutsu, and a forbidden one at that. Not only that, this teen had just made about 50 of them without breaking a sweat. Now, cried out the teenager as a horde of them rushed forwards. Kakashi, the small one that was under Minato's team, ran forward with a white sword pulled out next to him. Everything seemed to flash in a moment of a few heartbeats and he raced towards the front as well. Minato was already ahead, throwing normal kunai around the Iwa Nins, trying to make them round about in a group. One of the brown-headed enemy ninjas made some very quick seals and then aimed them at all of them, but everyone narrowly managed to dodge. However, there were many hanging around, at least 30 of them, with their own chakra to use against the 4 of them. Kuchio's no jutsu, Jiraiya called out, summoning forth a rather large frog and then bringing it forwards. In almost a single sound, with kunai and shuriken flying about everywhere, the dissipating noises of the clones filled the air. There were just too many enemies to handle like this. Jiraiya, now, erupted the cry in the background, muffled by the noises of metal clashing on metal. With pinpoint accuracy, the man threw it over the heads of the Iwa Nins. Then, once it reached the center, there was a slight flicker of that golden light that he had seen before with the test seals, but this. His eyes couldn't even register what was going on. A huge explosion of light and sound filled his senses as he felt himself being thrown back into the trees. Dust flew into the air, so fine that it seemed like it got pulverized by something powerful. Before the man could even distinguish what was going on, another explosion rocked the ground, leaving for coughing by the 2 smaller children as well as himself. Placing his hand in front of his face, he glanced onwards to try to see through the dust. What the hell just happened? Finally, he could see a figure standing in the middle. Like a bringer of death, the slightly hunched-over form stood alone in a wall of brown and green fog. The blue eyes were open, wide and burning into the surrounding. Adding to the effect was that there was a 10-foot-wide crater around him, but at the rim were the horrible, disfigured remains of what used to be 33 ninjas. Minato collapsed. "Sensei!" cried out Kakashi as the man who was his teacher's teacher cried out, "Minato!" There was no time for them to rush towards. Through some miraculous way, A low of enemies were defeated, but there were still 5 hanging around. Every one of them were stunned, some by fear and other by awe. The ones that had gathered their wits together first knew that whatever had just happened, they had to act soon. Kill them, Naruto gasped as he grabbed his stomach, dropping his kunai. It clattered upon the ground before resting by his foot. Destroy them. He kneeled over in pain, yelling out loud. Around him were the figures of Jiraiya and Kakashi, protecting both of the fallen blondes. Whatever else was going on was no longer in Naruto's focus. All he could tell was the ground below him that his eyes were watching while the rest of him was filled with pain. After what seemed forever, the pain subsided, leaving only a mental echo. Panting, the golden-haired teen tried to force himself up, but his legs refused to get off the ground for a moment. Mine, Uzumamane. Hey, you all right there? Came the voice of Jiraiya. Meekly moving his head over to face the voice, he gave a little nod before passing out upon the floor. Something is not right with that boy, was the last words he heard until his eyesight was nothing more than inky blackness. White. That was the first color that he managed to once again recognize. Moaning a bit, the teenager slowly plopped himself towards a sitting position. Luckily, it seemed as if he was no longer in pain from whatever had affected him earlier. The sound of curtains flapped by in the background. Though only a few brief glances at the scenery, he could already guess that he was at the Konoha hospital. He whistled out, plopping his hair back down towards a pillow that he knew was behind him. Suddenly, a head popped up over his own. It was Minato, and the hair hanging at the sides of his face hovered over Naruto's head. A small, caring smile that one would give to a buddy went across the adult's face. Hey, Naruto, good to see you awake. What happened? Minato resumed to the position that he was earlier, which was actually in a seat next to the bedding that Naruto was in. On top of that, the adult man was also wearing the normal hospital clothing, and his headband was not restraining the golden hair. It left for a halo of a look around his head. You know, he began, lifting his finger to point at the hair that was Naruto's head. Jiraiya was right, we do have the same hairstyle. What happened to the ninjas? And what are you doing here, too? Now, Naruto was confused. Just when he had thought he might have been back home for a few tenths of a second. The older man turned his face towards a slightly more serious approach, looking out the window. Konoha. He kept his gaze out there as the teenager fidgeted slightly underneath the covers. Iwahakure has claimed war against Konohagakure, and vice versa. Due to us preventing the enemy ninja from attacking our shinobi from the rear, we managed to push back them towards their own borders, but it'll be only a matter of time until they go at it again. Naruto was silent for a moment, thinking about what Minato had said. And you're here at the hospital because... What was the strongest ninja in the entire land of fire? No, of all time, doing in a hospital? It seemed so weird. Not only that, but the information of Konoha at war was slowly sinking in. Apparently, I need a little bit more practice with my new jutsu to stop wasting so much chakra that I pass out. That, and I also combined it with a move that was larger than normal. So, I was sent here to make sure I was alright, and when I heard you were around, decided to check on you as well. Rin and Obito wished to say hi as well. There was something not quite right here. Naruto pressed forwards once again, tilting his head slightly and looking Minato straight in the eyes. I mean, what are you doing in my hospital room? Minato took a look right back. Several moments passed before Naruto pulled away. Something about the man's gaze seemed to stir him a bit in a hard-to-explain sense. It was hard to keep eye contact with eyes like that. Yet, the man still looked at the teenager, taking in the hairstyle towards the 3 marks on each side of the cheek. It was as if he was searching for something, but came up with nothing. The blonde teen found it hard to try to place what might have been going in Minato's head. Jiraiya, the man began, still looking at the teenager. There was yet another pause. Something was making the future Yondaime hesitate. Jiraiya wants to know why your eyes turned red with slits while you were in spasms of pain. He claims it is something not associated with a bloodline limit. Naruto froze at his position. Outside, birds were singing at a prospect of a new day, gently flying by with almost no care in the world. One small sparrow flew by the window and hopped around on its foot, as if trying to hear the conversation that was surely to follow. Outside, there was nothing but sunshine, stressing that today was a beautiful day. Everywhere one could look, the eye could see vast arrays of colors, lights, and sounds. The yellow on the flowers stood out just as much as the bright red petals encircling the center. The leaves were a bright emerald, towering over with dark, rich brown trunks for support. Everything seemed like as if it had come out of a picture. Except for the looks on the occupants' faces inside a certain town. Even those who called themselves ninjas and shinobis had a glint of something inside their pupils. It was something that was not normal for such a happy place with such bright colors. No, it was a look that could only be placed as one word: horror. It was the horror that only a few days ago had an army of Iowa nin storm over a hot spring town and decimated it. The refugees from that town were already coming in, many of them with nothing but the clothing upon their backs. It was a sharp transition in trust as well as anything else. Tensions with the country of Iowa were already strained earlier during team versus team death brawls, but now everyone thought of the war. So far, it was just Konoha and Iowa, but many thought that other lands might be pulled into this. Rumors that this conflict could become another great shinobi war were on the tongues of many people. Already, the citizens were feeling the effects as security was being tightened up, and ninjas were patrolling every single area that they could see. The Sandaime was rumored to have already gone ahead and dispatched some of the Anbu teams to search for enemy ninja and have talks with them. And yet, in this land, there was still a beacon of hope and light that was beginning to form. It was small, and not much noted, for it was just the beginning of a war, but it was there among a few. Stories of a man who had brought death towards 70, 50, no, 200, one claimed, enemy ninjas with nothing but a flash of light had began to circulate. The said man was none other than Minato Namikaze. Currently, he was inside a white room with eggshell-colored curtains as they flapped in the wind. The sun seemed to radiate down towards the figures of two people, who were staring at each other. However, one was looking with a tinge of shock, and the other was having a facial expression of multiple emotions and thoughts. For, you see, what had started out as a normal conversation had turned into something else. Something much worse for a certain Naruto Uzumaki. The blonde-haired teen could only stare ahead, struggling to keep his emotions in check, as well not to show too much by just actions. Of course, the sudden question had hit him harder than a punch to the stomach by a certain pink-haired kunoichi, and it left him there, gasping. There was not much he could do to answer the question back wittily enough. The taller man stayed in that position, bringing his eyes into a somewhat harder gaze. It wasn't exactly threatening, but there was something else there, something like a trap that could spring if nudged in the wrong way. Time seemed to slow down for a few moments as Minato formed words that were barely audible to hear in the buzz that filled his ears. And he is coming in to talk to you as well. There is nothing much to worry about, as it is only going to be questions for now, but... Naruto looked up to see the man that he had always wanted to surpass give him a cold stare. If it is something that threatens Konoha, I will stop you myself with everything I have. He let the gaze fall down a little bit, still keeping a wary eye on the teen. Naruto had to gulp a little bit. Those blue eyes seemed to bore in far too much. Of course, I do hope it doesn't turn out to go that way. With that, the door opened and a certain white-haired pervert clambered in. Or rather, a certain white-haired man. Jiraiya had this younger look upon him, but now was not the time or the place to see the differences in the Ero Sennin he knew, and the Jiraiya of now. So, the Toad Sage began as he pulled up a wooden chair and plopped his body upon it. It seems that Uzumame is awake, if that is truly his real name. Alright, Gaki, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, or make this any plainer. You had blue eyes, and have them now, but they were red with slits only a while ago. Uchihas have red eyes, but they do not have slits going down the center, and the Yugi family has no blondes in their blood. Even if they did, no slits there, either. On top of it all, bloodlines tend to not leave the owners falling on the ground in pain with large amounts of chakra pulsing out of them. With a little hand movement, Jiraiya placed his fingers towards his chin, in a thinking position. Now, you didn't really do anything bad, but I did realize that you made too many cage bunshin to have been possible without killing oneself from chakra exhaustion. And, with a little nod towards Minato, the taller blonde man took a deep breath. I awoke after a few moments of rest, and when I was able to walk around, I went to visit you. I had heard that you were injured and unconscious, so I thought you might have been hurt with some sort of attack from the Iwa Nins. However, once I arrived there, Jiraiya-sensei and some nurses were already there, huddling around you with whispered voices. Naruto didn't like how this conversation was going. He was still in his hospital bed, with the white covers going up towards his abdominal, wearing the average hospital clothing. An internal instinct of panic fell upon him as he subconsciously moved his arms around as if to show discomfort. An inner instinct told him to run. The Namikaze continued on, moving his gaze from the eyes of the teenager towards the stomach. Earlier, when the nurses here tried to heal you, they discovered a seal upon your stomach. At first, they thought it was a medical one, but when they realized no one had treated you yet, they brought in Jiraiya-sensei to look at it as I was incapacitated. That seal was one of the most advanced and great works of the art I have ever seen, came a small mutter from the white-haired man. An 8-pronged seal, 8. Only a genius in such things could make something like that, and from what I am aware of, only the Sandaime, Minato, and I could accomplish something like this. Even then, that would be pushing the limitations of our minds. Gaki, there are only a few and rare seals I have seen or heard about in my lifetime with those type of prongs. And like I said, I wasn't going to sugarcoat this. An 8-pronged seal could mean many drastic things, but yours seemed to be on a weakened state. That, which I believe I know, is very bad. The man paused, as if unwilling to go on. The air in the room seemed to be grave as the black-eyed man made his gaze seem to pierce a point. Quote. Very bad for a Jinchuriki, such as yourself. A Jinchuriki. The mere word was more known as a human sacrifice, a word coined by a group in Suna many years ago. It was possible that it had originated during the times of the Second Shinobi War, when Suna and another country was against Konoha, the White Fang against the horrors of many thing. Hanzo, a man who was a powerful person, indeed, was a key figure in that setting, many years ago. Yet, they were not supposed to have really existed. Minato Namikaze didn't know what to say for sure. How his sensei had deducted that was beyond him for now. The seal was invisible for now, as the older man had stated that it only seemed to appear when Naruto was channeling chakra throughout his body. Still, that word left for a chilling remark. Someone had sealed a demon inside this child, an unhuman and supposedly impossible thing to do. Naruto seemed to be in some state of shock and panic. He could tell that the figure of the teenager was ready to spring away and hide somewhere. Yet, the look on the blue-eyed, blonde-haired person also showed that he was staying there, for there was not much of a choice of where to go. Minato had already heard of this possible theory from Jiraiya 2 days ago. It seemed that the teen didn't know he has been dead to the world for almost a week. What his sensei had said was surprising, as well as a bit disturbing. After all, it was a demon sealed within a human being. Though this did not make the child a demon, it made one wonder why. In the older shinobi wars, Jinchuriki were rumored to have been created as weapons to utterly slaughter their opponents. Not much else could be said about the subject as such. Human sacrifices were rare and couldn't be proven. Till apparently now. Listen, Naruto, began Minato, trying to calm the kid down. You aren't hurting anyone right now, but we do wish to learn something of the truth. It seems you have been keeping many secrets, and during a war, it is a very dangerous thing. But, I hate that word, came a small mutter. The teen's blonde hair covered his eyes, but his hands were clenched up in a tight fist. Jinchuriki. What a laugh. It's a word made from people who acted like gods at one point in their lives. It's dirty. It has no respect for those who had to experience the hate and the loneliness. Minato saddened his eyes, as did his sensei. He could see how people could hate someone like that. The anger and hurt in those words seemed to have come from deep within the teen, and now they both knew they were toddling on a mental path filled with ragged edges. The blonde man seemed to have a flashback for a few brief seconds over the apparent one-sided talk that his Team 7 had spied upon. He can talk to his inner sealed prisoner. That was what we were hearing. Some silence hanged around, but it seemed that Naruto was slowly calming down. His fists were still clenched together, but the blue's eyes were looking elsewhere. One could hear the ticking of a clock in the room, signaling that minutes were slowly slipping away. Fear could be seen etched in those windows of a soul. The adult man closed his eye. "You must really care for Konoha," began Minato softly. He could tell that two sets of eyes were looking upon him with confusion. To have come all the way here and even fight for this village's aid is a noble thing. I see nothing wrong with a shinobi fighting for this place's protection. Opening his eyes, he could see Jiraiya's expression off the side of his eyes. Right in front of him, however, was a stunned child. Slowly, very slowly, a smile curved on his lips. The tension that had filled the room dissipated. Minato. The dozing blonde opened his eyes for a few moments before looking onwards to find the source of the voice. Up ahead of him was someone that he really didn't know all that well. It was not often that he dozed out in the open, letting his guard down in general, but after using the Hiraishin at a new and advanced level, his body still ached after the day's earlier training. He could manage to do that technique for about 4 times before knowing his chakra was going to give. A small part of him was thinking that perhaps the seal and the jutsu could be upped a bit to use less chakra. "Oi," the voice continued as the adult man nodded his head to show that he was listening. "The Hokage wants to see you about some Hirushin no jutsu, or something like that." The person's Junin vest was probably back at the owner's home, abandoned along with perhaps some shuriken in a small pile. Kushina was never much of a neat or soft-spoken person. "So, yeah, go to him, or something. I'm outta here. Toddles." With that, there was a puff of smoke as the red-haired female disappeared. Minato yawned for a bit before standing up from the grass he was on. Currently, him and his team were resting after going over attack strategies and war scenarios. Naruto had even decided to help by doing his shadow clones, then transforming them into Iwanins before dispelling them all when the female was noticed in the area. Everyone had agreed that no one should know of the teenager's chakra capacities except for Team 7, the Hokage, and Jiraiya. Naturally, the secret of Naruto was still hidden to only the 2 adults that knew from the beginning. Minato's sensei thought it wasn't for the best, yet, to tell the Sandaime that a child had a demon sealed within. "Dang, I couldn't tell where the cage buncheons were," muttered Obito as he crawled out from his hiding spot. With a quick flick of his wrist, he threw his finger straight at Naruto, who was blinking back. "You, just wait until I get my Sharingan. Dobi, like that would really help," came a small mutter from Kakashi as he dispelled a genjutsu that made him look like a pile of leaves off to the side. Rin, the aspiring medical ninja, popped up from her place as well, standing between her 2 teammates. It had already been a few weeks since the truth was revealed, so the initial shock had already left Minato. "All right everyone, Team 7 is dismissed for now. We can begin our practice later in the evening." Only 2-3 weeks ago, it would have been the following day. Alas, a war had started, and everyone was trying to get stronger to prevent more attacks such as last time. The Tsuchikage, leader of Iwa, was reported to have been training as well. It was not looking well, even though nothing else had happened. Konoha was claimed to be the strongest out of all the nations, but that didn't mean that they had the most massive numbers. Minato smiled at everyone, before giving a hair rub on the already messy hair of Naruto. It was a simple, small suggestion that he did with the rest of his team before whisking off with a simpler version of the Hiraishin. Today, the sun was shining as Naruto took some turns here and there, going off towards a small apartment where the current Arrow Sennin claimed was the best for its price. Of course, it really was, but it also was located right next to the hot springs. Sometimes, he wanted to smack the perverted man on the head. For some reason, however, the older adult didn't seem to be as openly perverted as, well, before. Shaking his head, he began to look up towards the clouds. Ever since getting out of the hospital, things have been rather awkward. If this was the past, he was pretty sure just his mere presence here would screw everything up. Hell, he probably screwed everything up already. Dismissing those thoughts, once again, the whiskered teen sighed a bit. So far, the Kyuubi had been extraordinarily quiet since then. A few deep rumbles here and there was all that had come out. However, the feeling of utmost glee when he faced Jiraiya was also mixed with something else, a malicious glee that did not come from his mind. Speaking of Arrow Sennin, The white-haired man had stopped by a couple times a week, making sure the seal was all right and whatnot. "I'm glad you're not a certain female teammate I once had," came the grumble from the most perverted writer in the world. Or at least, his world. Or time. Or some other such nonsense. "Why's that?" he asked. Why wouldn't Jiraiya not want him to be like Tsunade, aside from some obvious reasons? "'Cause with your chakra reserves," he began as he gave a nod that signaled Naruto to put his shirt back on, "she would never stop punching me for peeking." When he heard the laughter coming out from the teenager, Ero Sennin quickly scowled. "Oh, laugh now, but one day, you'll see." It only made Naruto laugh worse. Nothing was planned for today, so now was perhaps a great time to work on his Rasengan. With that, he jumped off towards training field 11. Since it was afternoon, perhaps no one was going to be there until dinner. If so, maybe he could train elsewhere. Slowly, yet surely, the sun was beginning to set as the world went back towards silence. In a far-off section of Konoha there were many different people who were already getting ready to lay themselves into a bed in order to rest for the coming day. What could tomorrow bring? Would it bring newfound hope? Horror? A raise in a job? More news in this new war? The only ones that could tell such answers were the ones who no longer exist in the world. After all, fortune-telling was a rare gift that was only rumored to exist. It was lumped with all other fantasy things that one would tell their children at night. By the bridge off towards the east of the village hidden in the leaves were the beginnings of the training fields. Many were scattered about the village, each one different than the next one in terms of terrain and difficulty to navigate, but each one had the same purpose, to train. Of course, with names such as Training Field Number 16 Feet or other such connotations, it was only obvious as to see why. Naturally, there are training areas where more traffic would come by, and then there were those that had very little, if any, people waltzing in by accident. Naruto Uzumaki wanted a training field that was far away from everyone in order to practice his moves. If he was going to go in a war, there must be something better he could do. There just had to be, especially after the last fight's problems. First thing was first, he had to work harder on his taijutsu. Yes, he could kick and punch. Yes, he could dodge and maneuver rather well, but no, he was not perfect in that aspect. Physically, he was thinking that perhaps he was not built for loads of both physical power and speed. He was going to have to choose one side or another to work on in the coming future. Maybe when he was about 18 or so. Shaking his head, he determinedly got back into training. That was one thing about him. He would train and train until he would have the technique or style right before crashing down in exhaustion. Of course, right after that, he would jump back up again and continue with more vigor than before. After a couple of minutes to wrap up his hand-to-hand combat, Naruto relaxed for a little while. Staring at the scenery for a while, he brought himself back into his training schedule. This time, the teenager decided to change his practice from taijutsu to ninjutsu, the using of chakra through hand seals. With a quick symbolic movement of his fingers, he managed to create a shadow clone within fractions of a second. With that, he focused his mind to concentrate in a single spot and pumped chakra into it, allowing his clone to hold it in place. Rasengan, he cried out as he slammed the swirling ball of chakra right into the tree, making it splinter apart into thousands of little pieces. Over and over again he did it, trying to figure out how many attempts he could run off that jutsu and still be able to fight using other methods. Night was already falling before he realized it, and he was drenched with sweat. With a little sigh, his blue eyes observed the area around him once again. Phew, this seems like enough training for today, he muttered as the holes and destruction met his line of sight. I knew something was odd about you. You know Sensei's super special technique, cried out a voice behind him. With shock and adrenaline pumping through his veins, he turned around and kicked the source right in the face, only to see the form of a certain black-haired ninja fly through the air and hit a tree. Naruto blinked, gulping a bit. Oops, he thought before widening his eyes in shock. He had just hit Obito. Good thing his taijutsu wasn't the best in the world. Wait, Obito had seen him use the Rasengan. With a little grumble, the smaller child rubbed his belly before comically moaning and plopping back down towards the ground. After some few seconds, He managed to bring himself up towards a sitting position before glaring at the blonde-haired teenager. Why the hell did you do something like that? Gesh, you made it seem as if I was going to attack you. That freakin' hurt. Raising his finger and pointing right at the orange-goggled kid, Naruto rebutted back. How dare this guy say things like that? After being chased around by the Akatsuki most of his later years of his life, what else was he supposed to think? I did it 'cause you snuck up on me, pineapple. Pineapple, you encompass that more than I do. After several minutes of back and forth bickering, they both eventually managed to calm down enough to begin a better conversation. Unfortunately for Naruto, this meant that a certain Uchiha was going back to the forethought that had been assumed since the start. I knew you weren't normal. Sensei had just showed us that technique earlier, saying things like how it was something that he had created earlier with only his own sensei knowing it. But you know it, too. A teenager was now thinking if punching the kid on the head would make him shut up, but he also knew that it would be utterly pointless. What was it with him getting caught about stuff like this? Did he carry around some invisible sign available to be seen only to fate? Scratch that, he doesn't believe in fate. Kami that red, make my life hell. So, how do you know it? There has just got to be a reason why you look like Minato-sensei. And I came up with a theory that made Rin laugh, but I think it's the right one. It's the only one that would make sense. With some excitement, he reached forwards and tugged by the lower end of Naruto's vest and made the teen kneel down and look straight at the black eyes. You must be Sensei's younger brother. Younger brother. He blinked a few moments before chuckling. That chuckle grew into a small laughter, and before Obito could narrow his eyes in frustration, Naruto was rolling around on the ground, his pain from training all afternoon gone. Younger brother. Oh, that's rich. Ahahaha. Like I'm related to the Yondaime. Ahahaha. Quote. Yon, dame, you mean, sensei, grumbled Obito. Naruto just kept on laughing. And here he was thinking something horrible was revealed yet again. Naturally, he was once again bested by a shadow in the background, except this was a certain white-haired man with a green Junin vest. With a little jump, said man was already gone, heading off towards the break in the trees, with remnants of laughter filling the air. He's already said that a few times the first time he saw me, right after he woke up from the hospital the first time around to be precise. It's nothing major to really think about, finished up Minato Namikaze as he took his sight away from a scroll filled with seals. Tonight was going along like any other form of night. Here he was, golden hair shadowing some parts of his face, as his back was slightly arched to see each seal with scrutiny. So far, his Hiraishin no Jutsu was going along rather well, and perhaps in a few days it would become complete in his eyes. Or a few weeks, but the pressure of a war was making him move at an even faster pace. His sensei, Jiraiya, was currently in his apartment, off towards the side, sitting down on a couch for a few moments, clutching a bottle of sake. It was nothing strong, but it was the average picture that the man seemed to have around himself. Of course, Jiraiya-sensei was not drinking it. It seemed he had it for the sole purpose of holding it in his hand. Minato. Yes, he may be a djinn. Naruto. Cut it in the blonde. He stated that calling him by that word was an insult. Ah, well, Naruto then. Anyways, he may hold a demon within him, but there is more than that behind his eyes. I believe he might be hiding something bigger and something more important. Minato was listening, but also holding his special kunai in his hands, delicately writing a new seal on it. He also knows a certain jutsu. That last sentence came out hesitantly, as if he didn't really want to say it. Some silence came by a bit as Minato was still looking at his kunai. Yes, he knew that his sensei's words were important, but this sealing took a lot of concentration. He knows your Rasengan. The sound of metal hitting the ground rang throughout the building. It did such a thing twice before the noise stopped. The Namikaze turned his head and saw his sensei straight in the eyes, with his own blue ones widening up. He knows my technique. How is that possible? I've only shown it to you, and it takes a lot of steps to complete that. Jiraiya-sensei's hair moved slightly as the man stood up from the couch and placed the sake bottle down upon the table. I don't know how he did it. I've never shown anyone that technique outside of battle, and this Uzumame was running them by with at least 10 of them a minute or so. With the exception that he needed a clone to hold it in place, each one was a perfect stage 3 Rasengan. To say Minato was in shock was an understatement. It was one of his prized techniques for a reason. A lot of hard work and calculations went into that. Of course, it was not yet 100% complete as he wanted to tie in his wind manipulation, but still. This was stunning news. Obito caught him while he was training, and also brought that same topic, as well as an intriguing concept that I know isn't the truth, but interesting nevertheless, the man continued with hushed tones. Your student had stated something about how the two of you look too oddly alike, and quite frankly, I have to agree. When I first laid my eyes upon Naruto, I almost called him by your name until I realized that he was a bit shorter and had a slightly different hairstyle. Yet, in all aspects, he pretty much is a clone of you, if I could say something that far. There is a similarity within the two of you. For this, Minato had to think. It was true, they did look amazingly alike, as well as more or less the same skin color. A major exception was the lack of whisker marks on the adult's face. Still, the Namikaze knew he had no family or distant relatives alive. He did not come from a major clan that had possible hundreds of fellow clansmen. No, he was picked up from the streets after his parents died, and he was sure that the rest of his distant family was gone as well. When he was younger, he thought maybe he had come from Iowa itself for the fact that there were a decent amount of blondes there, but decided it wasn't worth the effort thinking of that. Konoha was his home. Being brought back into the present after the quick sidetracking thoughts, the white-haired person only shook his head. I don't know what is really going on with that boy, but I do know it is something that requires even more looking into. As you had stated earlier, he has done nothing wrong so far, but there is only so far I am able to trust a stranger like that. We may be able to hide the fact of his certain condition from Sarutobi, but it would be unwise to say nothing about the whole Rasengan thing. For all we know, he could have the Hiraishin no Jutsu lodged somewhere in his brains. Jiraiya finished while looking right at his student. Minato took a deep, collective breath. Rubbing his hand through his hair, he could think about how much more difficult and odd his life was once the teenager had stepped magically into it. They were going to have to tell the Hokage something after all, though, but perhaps not just yet. They could only keep something like this secret for so long, of course, but now was not a good time. I still don't think we should tell him, Minato concluded. He is very busy, and I am sure the both of us could handle it. Even though I know it would be for the better to have the Hokage in on this, the war with Iowa is having too many complications. I'm sure he is trying to secure funds right now for the war from the Lord. With a small sigh, he turned his face to look out towards the scenery of Konoha. Night was already there, with no clouds to hide the supreme view of the amazing stars. He heard his sensei do something like a scowl in the background, but Jiraiya said nothing for a while. Well, if this is what you think, then all right. But I am still going to keep an eye on him. Eventually, I will find this out. But if he does one more thing suspicious, then we will have to talk to Sarutobi. Minato nodded in agreement. Silent, he was cursing. It seemed that his prized student wasn't realizing that he was growing a soft spot for the newcomer. Certainly, for even the white-haired man had found a spot in his brain for the kid, too. He seemed so much like a hyper, younger version of Minato that it made feel almost like a grandfather. Almost. Still, the news was something important. On top of that, his mind kept going back to recall the 8-pronged seal that resided on the stomach of the boy. Yes, it was a genius work of art, something he was unsure he could pull off, but it also seemed more than just a simple sealing. Unfortunately, there was not enough time to accurately look and study the seal, and he was certain he couldn't walk up towards the child as simply ask for something like that. Oh, sure, he examined it every once in a while with the blonde's permission, but the examination the man was thinking of was something on a more deeper level. Yes, this Naruto Uzumame needed to. Uzumame, mused Jiraiya as he walked steadily towards his apartment. That was certainly a weird name. It could be a mixture of 3 different words. Uzu, wo, for swirl, mame, do could be either a child, something small, or if one was daring enough, some sort of food. Finally, Trailing at the very end was Mian Yin, which was a crude form of a seal, symbol, or a mark. So, the last name made almost no logical sense. Well, the last two parts did, as it could be taken as sealed as a child, in retrospect, but where did the swirl fit in? It could be for the fact that the seal is a swirl figure. With little effort, the toad sage turned the knob and entered his home as the child's last name thoughts slowly faded away. A book he was currently working on was lying around, the sheets written with very unique kanji. Most of it was already complete, and all it really needed now was to be sent off to the Konohaian publishers. It was a start of what should be a new series that he had hoped would become a bestseller. He had written it based on his adventures and general life through the alias of a character called Naruto. Whoa, talk about déjà vu. Today was certainly a day for musing. This was the first time in a while that he decided to visit Konoha, but old memories of his travels were hanging in his head. One thing oddly strung a chord louder than any others. It was the prophecy he heard of, the one that dealt with finding a child that could save or destroy the world while writing a book. The destroying aspect sent a shiver up his back, but he had already found the child, a certain one called Nagato and his friends. Thus, the man went to sleep with a mix of complicated thoughts. Well, that's what I think, mumbled Obito once more as the angsting, stoic, etc. Kakashi looked away with annoyance, and his secret crush went ahead and fell to the ground laughing. He had just exclaimed his new personal views on a person now aptly named Sensei's clone, and they both weren't exactly taking it very well. It was a new day, and Minato sensei was already off to get a personal mission. The black-haired Uchiha had no clue what it was to be about, but he did know that their teacher had instructed them to train while he was gone. Sensei had also left a note stating that some Junin was going to help them practice. Of course, this meant about 2 to 3 days in shinobi speech, so here he was, talking to his teammates. Or rather teammate and a walking rulebook. Sure, I totally believe you, Obito, cried out Rin as she laughed again. Her brown hair moved to and fro as she held her hand to her chin, continuing to chuckle after propping herself up again. Naruto is totally from the future. And Sensei's son as well. I am so positive of that. Ahahahaha. Dobi was the only thing Kakashi mentioned, but Obito could swear that his rival was smirking underneath the blue mask of his. Rin had managed to calm down back towards her normal personality in the end, nodding her head as she mentioned everyone to get ready and start training. They all knew that Konoha wouldn't stay peaceful like this for long, showing almost no signs of the war. It would only be a matter of time before bigger casualties were to befall them, no matter how much they hoped it was not so. A voice came from the background, making them both look over and notice this average tall person with flaming red hair. Her blue eyes gazed down at the both as her hands pointed to the three of them. I got a note from Minato that said something like he needed a replacement for a few days. Name's Kushina Uzumaki. And I'm here to make sure you guys are ready to train. So, let's get started. Little steps could be heard. At least, one thought they were little until the large figure of someone raced by. This certain person's hair was whipping in the wind, carrying about a scared and apprehensive look on this woman's face. Her cherry blossom pink hair was only up towards his shoulders, but her face was that of someone who was now getting to be known in the Konoha hospital. However, now was not the time to talk about this female figure's accomplishments, as this person seemed to have something much bigger on her mind. She was even using the driving force of people and nature by shoving it into her shoes in order to race off towards the large, red building that loomed in front of her. It was getting to be early evening outside, and normally she would be eating something from her home or from a local restaurant. Today, though, no such thing was going to happen. Her feet pounded the pavement one after the other, making her seem like a black blur racing through the streets. It wasn't until she almost crashed into a vendor selling his wares did she jump high into the sky to land on a roof. Each step made her closer and closer to where the leader of this village was. Each step getting closer and closer to a time when she had to say something she did not want to be said. Yet, this was of utmost importance. Two things were driving her, making her go faster than she normally went. One of them was the fear of losing someone once again, and the other was the spotting of something she never wanted to see ever again. Tsunade Shisho. she cried out as she banged open the doors. The speed and the strength of that action was enough to cause certain reactions from the Hokage, but immediately the blonde-haired woman calmed down after seeing her student. That is, until the woman saw the facial expression. What is it? Wondered Tsunade, the well-known and revered medical ninja. Rumor had claimed that she could find the antidote over every poison and thwart people from death. Only, she never claimed she could thwart death. It was just a rumor that was sprung up by people who saw her heal what they thought was the impossible. Yes, she was an excellent healer, but even she knew she had limits. Placing her hands on her hips, allowing the green sleeves to fall for a moment as she stood up, she brought her face into an irritated scowl. She was going over some important things to deal with Konoha's future, such as the sheet that had just come in, stating that it was time to get a new mission for team. The pink-haired girl's eyes bored into the Sanin's sand-brown one, mouthing words that the leader of the village never wanted to hear in her life. Naruto is missing, cried out Sakura. Normally, when blonde teenager was claimed missing, he was actually in a different area than usual. However, the tone of worry in that young girl's voice was saying something else. And 2 members of the Akatsuki were hanging around the entrance of the village until they left only moments ago. Shisho, I think Naruto was taken by them. It felt like her heart had plummeted towards the ground. The blonde Hokage felt a sense of doom as those words entered her brain. It was true that her surrogate grandchild had been outside the village, but he was just by the doors to take a walk. To have him missing with the members of the Akatsuki, there was no coincidence to her. That would only mean that. Yamato, she cried out in her authority's voice, pushing aside the part of her that was getting to be so worried that all she wanted to do was stand and stay in shock. It only took a mere moment for the brown-haired man with the fake name, Yamato, to arrive, but it was far too long in her eyes. With a quick salute, the man took a look at the woman in front of him. Confusion was clearly etched upon his face. Before he could ask what the problem was or what was needed from him, Tsunade slammed her hand on her desk angrily. Naruto is missing, and there were 2 Akatsuki members outside this village only prior before his absence. Find him. Her instincts were telling her to go along and travel with this man to find that golden-haired teen, but if something were to happen inside Konoha while she was out. Take a team with you of anyone who can help. I don't care if you have to drag some of them away from their homes in ropes, just get them and find him. Make Kakashi, Neji, and Sakura on this team for sure. With that, she screamed out another voice, calling for the Toad Hermit. Please let him hear me call for him, just this once. Oh, Naruto, please, oh please, be alright. While the disturbance was going on in the Hokage Tower, a certain silver-haired man was walking through the streets of Konoha, reading his most treasured book in the dimming light. However, he stopped once something tugged at the back of his brain. Something different and off. Taking a glance up, his experienced skills at being a shinobi made him scan the area around him, taking note of every little detail that his eye could tell. After years of seeing through only one eye, his depth perspective was better than that of someone who could normally see through 2 eyes. Something seemed off with everything. For some reason, everything seemed odd. His physical body seemed all right, yet sluggish at the same time. The buildings around appeared to be strong, but the objects inside were different. Or rather, they seemed faded, almost like they were sun-bleached. Alarmed, he placed his book away, noting that now that feeling of that something was spreading around him like wildfire. Racing forwards, he came towards an area where little children were playing. It was closest towards a clearing so he could check the surrounding area and make sure there wasn't something like another invasion happening. As soon as he got there, he got to examine each and every item in his general view, but nothing seemed wrong with them. The small cries of children who were still playing could be heard in the distance, and everything was normal. Yet, Kakashi Hatake could not shake away this feeling that an object off towards the distance caught his eyesight. It was a piece of gold that should not have been there. Turning his head, the man's physical form turned into that of shock. For what he was seeing could not have been seen, and should have never been seen. It was just impossible. In front of him was a small child with whisker marks that could just be distinguished slightly. Yet, this small, little kid was very transparent and hazy, but also seemed to be the source of all the thoughts the adult man was feeling only moments before. He was silently and softly crying, rubbing his cheeks, for it seemed to be that the golden-haired kid had fallen off the swing sets. What is going on? Some sort of genjutsu? If so, how? The small kid seemed to fade completely away for a fraction of a moment before returning with the same opacity as perhaps a sheet of water. One could barely tell that he was still there. The cries couldn't be heard, but the slight pain on his face could. Then, another figure showed up, knocking away whatever stability the silver-haired man had to stand. In a sense of shock and a clash of memories from his past, he saw the figure of a tall, grown man in his 20s or so kneel down next to the crying child. He was just as hazy, seemingly like some sort of an apparition. Kakashi could only watch with widening eyes as the man said something inaudible to the child. With that, the blue-eyed male picked up the child, rubbed the cheeks himself, kissed said child on the forehead before leaving down the path away from the park before fading away into the air. That was when the world seemed to run back to normal once again, leaving that sense of something far away. That man, it was the fourth, his teacher, his sensei, his instructor, a dead man. Yet, how? The man was dead, and the child, there was only one person who had the whiskers upon his face, but Naruto came into existence the day his sensei died. There was no way that this could happen. Naruto wasn't a ghost or anything of that sort, but the how. How? His thoughts were interrupted as the figure of the Anbu, best known towards the younger generation as Yamato, ran into the scene with his brown hair flapping in the wind. Kakashi. Naruto might have been kidnapped by the Akatsuki. Silence. Kakashi. Impossible, was all the genius muttered. Rin's brown hair gently moved to and fro as she edged her way closer towards her secret crush. She wasn't exactly open about her thoughts over Kakashi, but she wasn't exactly conservative either. She wanted to get to know him better and possibly start something like a friendship that would eventually turn out to be something more when she got old enough. However, she sighed a bit as she noticed her hair was in a horrible shape, and that her teammate was looking elsewhere. The practice session with Kushina Uzumaki had gone as she thought it would have. The first thing she did was try to see what level they were at, and then help them train. At first glance, their temporary instructor was insanely pretty. Long red hair that reached below her hips, and one little part held back by a yellow beret to prevent it from going into her eyes. She also had a certain figure that a brown-haired girl wouldn't have minded when she got as old as Miss Uzumaki. Her personality, though, was almost the same as the teenager, Naruto. Talk about weird. With a sigh, she turned over to face her friend, Obito. Though she did love Kakashi, he wasn't really nice towards the black-haired Uchiha. She acted as a buffer between them both, but since she didn't have her sensei's help, the two of them were at each other's throats again. Trying to bring in a conversation that both could talk about without insulting each other was probably the best way to get them out of this. So, what do you guys think of Uzumaki? Hey! Cried out Obito as he raised his chopstick in the air. They were currently eating at Ichiraku's, much to Rin's amusement. It seemed that whenever she was with Minato-sensei and her team, she would complain about eating too much ramen. Now that she was here with her team, but no teacher, she had wanted to eat here. Uzumaki is Reallly close to Uzumamane. Rin felt her eyes deadpan to the ground for a bit before sighing. There went Obito again, like earlier this morning. He was dead set that Naruto was the guy from the future, and son of Minato-sensei. Apparently it seemed like Kakashi no longer really thought it was as funny as earlier, for all he seemed to do was scowl. Or at least that was what Rin picked up due to her lack of being able to see through the masked cloth. It was times like this she wished she was a Hyuga. Like magic, the blonde teen appeared out of nowhere. In this sense, she could see how Naruto and Minato were similar, but she wouldn't go out and say related. Hey Rin, Kakashi, and Obito. He cried out happily as he ordered a couple of bowls of miso ramen from the stand owner. How's it been going, and where is Minato-san? It confused her the way he sometimes said her sensei's name with a title one day, and without one another. Oh well. Obito piped up, giving the teenager a certain observation look while slurping down his own nutritious food. He's not here right now as he went on some sort of mission. Rin noticed that Naruto was starting to chomp down upon the food, eating it all for what it was worth. Said blonde was already on bowl number 3.5 when the Uchiha had mentioned that they were all assigned a sub-sensei until Minato returned called Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto was holding onto a ramen bowl in his hands, just having emptied it a few moments earlier. She noticed that his blue eyes widened in what seemed to be shock as the bowl slipped from his fingers and crashed upon the wooden counter, shattering into thousands of small, little china pieces. The wooden chopsticks thudded softly as well before rolling off the counter. The teen's hands were still in the air, as if trying to clutch onto a ramen bowl made of glass, but the eyes on the boy were opened and stunned. Maki, he whispered before turning his head to face Obito. With sudden agility, Rin was stunned as he picked up the black-haired boy and shook him for all he was worth. "Where is she? Where did she go?" he cried out. "Who is she? What does she look like? Where can I find her? Does she have a clan? Does she have blonde hair? Does she have a relative with blonde hair? I think you're hurting Obito," cried our Rin as she raced to stop the teenager. It seemed he wasn't going to stop anytime soon, so she had to step in. Already some of the passing villagers and the owners of the store were looking at him as if he lost his sanity a few seconds ago. Obito himself seemed stunned before muttering out that he didn't know where she was. As if disappointed or upset over the lack of information, Naruto made a single ram seal after letting go of the child. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he cried out as about 20 Narutos filled the area. "Find her," he cried out as he ran off, leaving a trio of stupefied children behind him. He had even forgotten to pay for lunch. Mortal, you are getting on my nerves. I don't know who your parents are, and frankly, I don't care. Naruto shoved the thought out of his head as her hurried trough the allies, giving his own search as well. Kushina Uzumaki. Well, as one carries their father's last name, it not as if he was related to her, but if she happened to have a blonde-haired brother or some blonde relative that was a male. His blue eyes became determined as he raced forwards towards the Hokage area. Maybe the old man knew this Kushina. With a quick and agile jump, he reached the roof, scared a couple of guards, raced past the secretary, and landed right in front of a large desk with the Sandaime Hokage looking onwards with alertness before it faded away into somewhat slight annoyance. Hey, sorry for bursting in like this, but I have to know something. Where can I find this Kushina Uzumaki person? Please, Hokage." Since the old man didn't really know Naruto all that well in this, wherever he was, it wasn't he could run ahead and say, "Gigi, I have to know something about her. Where is she?" Lucky for him, he got an answer. With that, he raced off towards the eastern side of Konoha, dispelling his clones on the way over there. To his amazement that he saw a small apartment complex show up. Now, he wasn't exactly expecting a grandiose clan complex of any sort, but an apartment. Did that mean that this woman left her family? Why would she do that? With quick and sudden knocks, he tried to calm himself down. The teenager knew that this place and this time was different, but so far some of the facts were staying true to themselves. Maybe, just maybe, he could find out who his parents were. The door opened, and out came a woman with annoyance on her face. Her long hair fell towards the back, but it seemed as if she just came out of a nap or something as it was a bit messy here and there. "Namikaze," she muttered, confusing the blonde for a moment. "You were supposed to be on a mission, from what your team said." If that was just an excuse to, the woman then took a note of the facial features of the teen before blushing out of embarrassment. "Ah, sorry, I thought you were someone else. May I help you?" Red. She had red hair, not blonde. That was one strike, but the last name still held promise. "Please, ma'am, I know this is going to sound weird, but do you have any male relatives with blonde hair? Or male relatives in general? Please answer." "I'm sorry, little kid, but you are creeping me out a bit." "But, no, I don't have any relatives," she began, trailing off before looking back at Naruto. "No. Relatives. Ah. And the only blonde-haired men I have seen in my life is someone from the Yama-something clan and Minato Namikaze, and now you." The blonde-haired teen lowered his head for a moment, muttering a small, "Ah." Maybe he was holding too much hope up here. It could have been such a weird series of events in his life. Hey, kid, you seem upset or something. You alright? Nodding a bit, Naruto then said thanks and left before heading towards the hotel room he was living in for the moment. With a small sigh, he plopped his head on the bed and looked up towards the ceiling. There he stayed, getting those thoughts out of him so that he could feel better later. Yet, why was he feeling so disappointed? Outside, there was nothing but shadows as the wind held the locks of a certain golden blonde hair. The figure of this person was that of someone who was deep in thought, almost as if he was pondering over life mysteries. There were trees with their chocolate brown leaves drooping over the field below him, the leaves falling gently down like soft rain in the middle of summer. This man wore a dark green vest that signified this man's status from his hometown. Or perhaps one could call it a home village. Whatever the case, this man stood there alone, allowing the wind to caress face. The mission given by his village leader, the Hokage, was one filled with danger and the slight promise of becoming gravely injured. It was an S-class mission, and the mission was to infiltrate the enemy lines to see what they were planning. Normally, within times of two nations living in coexistence, this would be considered an act of war. However, the war between two countries had already begun. This golden hair man was trying to prevent any innocent deaths like what had happened only weeks ago. His thinking of doing this difficult mission suddenly became something he just had to do after thinking of the possible death toll that could happen that didn't even deserve it. He did not want this happening to his precious people or the land he grew up in. The man's name was Minato Namikaze, an aspiring ninja whose reputation was beginning to get spread throughout the land very slowly. This mission was to test not only his abilities, but to check the stability of the enemy land. Was Iowa structurally sound? What was the real reason for starting this war that was certain to bring nothing but pain and misery? Was it really over nothing but something as pathetic as land? Whatever the answers to these questions, he knew that this war would last longer than what he wanted. No, he never wanted this war. Large mushrooms, larger than him, tower over the rocks, leaving their shadows on the ground below. Being near mid-afternoon in the middle of a forest left for the curtain of green and gray to cover everything. Even his normally sun-kissed hair had a tone of darkness on it. The man's body slowly crept closer towards the area in front of him, as there were noises there that animals could never make straight ahead. It could only mean one thing. To his view of sight, right in front of him, there resided the forms of 4 other people. Each one was huddling around a fire, so small that it wasn't until someone stumbled upon it that they could see it. Of course, being so close to these people would only guarantee the viewer's death. It was only because he was a trained ninja, a shinobi, that prevented him from being spotted and then hunted. With no more sounds, he edged closer and closer, wanting to get to know who else was there as well as the odds against him. The leader of the village had stated to get as much information as he possibly could before removing the enemies from existence. It was a harsh role to play, but it was something he had to get done. If he did not dispose of them, they may come back and attack his home. There were only 4 of them, but each one seemed like they have done nothing but training of their lives. Sharp knives, no, sharp katanas, were strapped on the backs of the men. Each person had a ferocious look on their faces, but none of them knew that Konoha's yellow flash was creeping upon them. In the blue-eyed man's hand was the 3-pronged kunai. He had no intention of using his weapon, and what it stood for, against these men that current moment, but if forced, he would kill them faster than they could blink. The best way to get information, for now, was to eavesdrop until he was certain that he could not get any more information that way before attacking. It was a sick and immoral act to do, but like he thought earlier, it was something he simply had to do. I can't believe that this area was such a piece of cake to get into without being seen, began one of them, bragging as if the other 4 did not do the same thing he did. Kuso is a land that we could easily take over and use as a base of operations to defeat Konoha before they notice anything wrong. One of the men shook his head, and slowly sighed a bit before mentioning the trees around them. This land is currently too close to Konoha, yet too far away from Iowa to be a base of operations for now. Perhaps, if we were ever to take control of land just south of our great nation. The talk continued, going on about things that no longer had any relevance towards the Iowa-Konoha war. It was at this moment that Minato realized that only those two of them were talking, as the other two were merely sleeping with their eyes open to make it appear as if four were on guard. With a quick flick of his wrist, he buried two sharp metal objects into the hearts of the ones speaking, turning away before he saw them bleed to death. The figures of the sleeping ones were people that would give more information because they would be caught off guard. The bodies of their comrades with shock on their faces were to show that they couldn't run away. Often, being a shinobi made it seem like it tapped away his innocence a little at a time. Within a fraction of a mental second, he shoved that thought away. To awaken the other men, he poked them softly with his kunai after paralyzing them with a small lightning jutsu before flinging a shuriken to wrap them around with strong wire. Both of them awoke with surprise etched upon their faces, as well as a little bit of pain. How could they have been captured so easily, and their teammates killed without as much as a scream? The man in front of them only held his weapon to their necks before narrowing his eyes into a cold demeanor. "Who the hell are you?" screamed out one of them. Minato only continued to stare at them with the same look as only seconds before. "How in the world did you do this?" The other man tried to struggle against the wire, but it only resulted into cutting deep into his skin, breaking through the fabric. Grunting in pain, the man gave his own glare back, but for some reason the golden hair man's gaze dug deep into his prisoner's soul. "What are you going to do to us?" he cried out, still trying to attempt to escape. Minato was aware that the blood of this man was already seeping into the clothing, making it seem like as if he accidentally cut a vein. Digging his weapon slightly deeper into their necks, he managed to get them to explain what they were doing there. In spite looking large and powerful, it ended up that these men were the scouts of Iwa. They were strong, but most of their training relied only on speed, making for brute strength something that they needed help on. Yet, these men were not going to have a chance to practice, for once this man got the stuff he needed, he allowed them to die in the most painless and beautiful way yet imagined. In the far distance, there was one more person of the group who was not by the fire. He saw the golden-haired man leave, heading up with a different section of the forest before heading down to see the last of his comrades. The sole survivor had seen nothing of how the man had killed his friends other than a flash gold. And, it had frightened him. It would take 2 weeks, but the dangers of the human being that known as Konoha's yellow flash began to creep its way into the voices and minds of people outside the village hidden in the leaves. Naruto stared right at the ceiling, seemingly looking at nothing but the wooden boards that crisscrossed to protect the person inside from rain, wind, and snow. After what had happened only 5 days ago, a part of him still has the small sliver of hope that the possibility of parents existed within reach. Maybe his parents did not know each other. There could be the possibility that his parents did not come into Konoha until later. Or perhaps the redhead woman that he had met with for only a few seconds did not realize that another relative was out there. Getting himself slowly up from the bed, he allowed his body to stretch for a few moments before turning around to look at what he was going to do today. Should he run around and try to practice his Rasengan? The last time he tried to do that resulted in Obito finding him. He definitely did not want to get spotted by anyone else, like someone as smart as Kakashi, Old Man, or Jiraiya. Thank goodness to the fact that Minato was not currently there. He can at least practice his special technique without the creator stumbling in without prior notice. The blonde teenager knew that nothing more could spell disaster than that scenario that just went by his mind. A knocking by his door made him realize that he was still dressed in his pajamas. Crashing over some wooden tables that held an iron teapot, he managed to aim his head towards the door before screaming out, "I'll be right there." Quickly, he raced towards the closet, throwing on every article of clothing that he normally wore. His sea-green crystal necklace won via a bet hung over his jacket before he tucked it in. At least he did not need to comb his hair, for no matter what he did it would always stay in the same position, 24/7. Finally reaching the door, he threw it open by sliding it a couple of feet. There, right in front of him, was the same redhead woman from earlier with Team 7 right in tow. "Hey, Naruto!" exclaimed the black and brown-haired ones. The silver-headed child only stared ahead and gave a slight nod, looking around the general area. The child's eyes went up wide at the sight of the teacups scattered upon the grounds. The blonde-haired teenager grabbed his hand and scratched the back of his head before doing a nervous chuckle. "Ah, "What is everyone doing here at my hotel room?" questioned Naruto. This was certainly not your average way to begin the morning. One of the children even had a smile propped against his cheeks. It was none other than the black-haired Uchiha. The female adult raised her hand and pointed straight at the kinda stunned Naruto. "Obito here managed mention that you are a ninja that has no team, but also mentioned that you hanged around Team 7 often enough to be considered an extra member. Since today is a day where I have to work on the teams, well, teamwork, Obito wisely mentioned that you could stand here and help us out. Since you don't seem to be doing anything today, what better way to spend your time than by hanging out with us?" Naruto blinked a couple of times, trying to contemplate that he was to do. Yes, he was thinking of training, and what better way to get to know this female's background family than by being nearby. Still, it was kind of surprising when the four of them appeared right in front of his door. Speaking of that, how did they find him here? It wasn't as if he showed them where he was staying. However, before he could think of further of such thoughts, the black-haired child grabbed onto that teenager's arm and began to tug, screaming out that it was best to train with Naruto. The day's projection into working on the method of teamwork didn't exactly go to plan. It seemed that the two small, male children could merely do nothing but argue and bicker. One had to do something, one had to do something else. It was almost as bad as his own team, for crying out loud. Giving credit where credit was due, he had to admit that Rin was a great person to settle both of them down. Placing his hand to his chin, Naruto began to think a little bit harder. Out of everyone that he has met so far, here in this land of somewhere, the only ones that he knew are still alive are his teachers. Now that he mentions that thought, Kakashi had never mentioned his old teammates, or all the time he spent with them. It was almost as if every single one of them had vanished off the face of the earth. Wait a minute, Minato died by sealing in the nine-tailed fox demon into his belly. What if everyone else had died because of the Kyuubi? The stupid monster wasn't exactly giving him any information. In fact, it was oddly silent, even though that it could now communicate to the blonde teenager's head without prior notice. It must be planning something, or it would have spoken up earlier these past 5 days, with its voice rooted in malice. Why did his life have to be so confusing now, out of all times? Gah, I'm thinking too many questions again. Yet, the Kyuubi must be thinking of some plan for it to shut up this long. Maybe I should ask Jiraiya what he thought of the seal. After all, he is really good at that stuff. Or I guess I could get Minato to do it, but I don't think that would be such a good idea for now for either of them. Stupid war. Sighing mentally, it took a second for him to realize that everyone else was looking at him weirdly. Hey, sorry, I was deep in thought. In the background, Obito snorted. That's gotta be some mighty deep thinking, he muttered before giving off a smile. The attitude about the black-haired Uchiha was one that Naruto could get used to, but also get rather annoyed at. Of course, the same thing could be applied towards the Kakashi of this current, time. Now Obito, Naruto. I understand that today was not exactly a great one, but at least we all tried to get along, began the brown-headed Rin once more. Turning around to face the redhead woman, who was standing behind them with a bored and tired look on her face, Rin nodded a little bit. Besides, I've heard that our sensei was going to come back tomorrow. Thank Kami, came a small mumble from Kushina. Ignoring the woman, the information seemed to strike the interest of the rest of the members, as well as the blonde teenager. I wonder what type of mission Minato was assigned to. Of course, it probably dealt, and that was not something that Naruto wanted to think about right now. Well, he did, but he was uncertain of what his actions to do next in this war. The last thing he wanted was to have the Kyuubi to have influence over him in the middle of a fight. Darn it, he should have paid attention more to Iruka during history. Jiraiya rubbed his forehead again with his large hands, trying to relieve the stress that was growing in his mind. It was late in the evening, and his prized student, who he thought was his son, was back with unsettling news. It seemed that the scouts of Iwa were trying to find weakness in the land surrounding Konoha to advance the front line. Of course, there was no front line of fighting yet, but the failed diplomatic relationships of yesterday between the two cages were certain to make one then the next few days. To civilians who lived with shinobi all around them, they knew that one powerful shinobi could waltz from Iwagakure towards Konohagakure in such a short period of time. Because of this, he decided to stay put in his hometown for just a little longer. Normally he would go around collecting information from his spy network, but he knew that the first couple of onslaughts against Konoha's shinobi were to be destructive and chaotic. It was best the first fights were in lands that no one occupied with him to help back the army up. Then there were the troubles with Naruto. Even though he was assured by his student that the teenager meant no harm and was not a spy, he could still not shake the feeling that the child needed constant watch. The blue, spiraling chakra of the jutsu, Rasengan, was still freshly imprinted in his mind. Right about that very same moment, the blonde-haired adult entered his apartment. Jiraiya had mentioned ahead in advance that he was going to wait for Minato here once the man had talked to Sarutobi. Tonight, he was going to try to persuade his student to look at the seal upon the teenager's stomach. Minato was a genius in basically everything, including the art of sealing. As the white-haired man had no clue how to do an 8-pronged seal, he was unable to tell whether it was stable or deteriorating or what type of demon the child hosted inside. Certainly the blonde adult could tell, and with the knowledge of the condition of that seal, the Sannin will be able to place one thought out of his head. Sakura didn't want to enter inside the Hokage room with the mission report that she had in her hands. The black-clothed fingers were slightly shaking in the sadness and fear that seemed to loop in her every vein. The mission to search out for Naruto had ended in a complete failure. Kiba and Neji could follow the trace of the number 1 most hyperactive ninja until just after passing the large yellow walls that surrounded the village. From there on out, it was as if Naruto was simply whisked away. "We have to tell her," began the black-haired Neji as he looked at Sakura's blue-green eyes. Everyone else that was on the search team was right behind her, including Kakashi, but it was voted that maybe the female should tell the news. Even the silver-haired Junin wasn't standing up towards the idea of facing what could either be an angry Tsunade, or a depressed one. The search had even included Kiba's sister, Hana, and Jiraiya, but to no avail. The said Toad Sage was currently off someplace else, claiming that he was going to continue to look for any signs while they would tell the news. There was too much seriousness in that voice of the older man. Slowly, she went forward. For some reason, it seemed that even Sai had his face in slight worry. It seemed that the disappearance of the blue-eyed ninja was taking its toll on everyone. With her foot coming in closer, she noticed that the Godime was looking at her with those intense, tan eyes. "Well, did you find him?" she asked with concern and worry in those tones that Sakura was certain the woman was trying to hide to maintain the image of a strong leader. Oh, Tsunade was strong, but she also had a heart for the one who was lost. "No," mumbled the teenager named after the cherry blossom. "We lost his trail after hitting nearby the forest that outlined the village." And with that, the ruler of Konoha began to silently cry, placing her head into the eyes. Kakashi and Hana began to take everyone away from the room into the hallway. They knew that Tsunade wanted to talk to them after she took care of this grief that had stricken her right now. Sakura could only look down towards the floor. That's it for today. I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.